Chapter 1151. Gu Xingyan was still experiencing his new power after the breakthrough. Li Guangtu was thinking about the future of the purgatory of heaven capital. Jiang Shangyu was integrating his strength in his heart. The three of them were silent for about 2 or 3 minutes with their own thoughts. Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled and simply said, "It's over here. We should go back to Zhongzhou State." This time, he had brought Gu Xingyan and Li Guangtu here. All his goals had been achieved. Gu Xingyan was so compatible with the rules of chaos that he was half a step stronger than he had expected. Now he only needed to adapt to his realm after the breakthrough and sort out his thoughts. There was no doubt that he was a new peak combat capability in the dark world. The purpose of bringing Li Guangtu here was more complicated. It was a deterrent and also meant to strengthen Li Guangtu's confidence. Apart from other things, the hundreds of villagers in the village whose physical qualities were close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were enough to make Li Guangtu know what choice he should make. Although these villagers only had physical qualities without realms, this scene was enough to make Li Guangtu believe that the future was promising. After the trump card of one of his bases was exposed, it could also make Li Guangtu take his position in the alliance seriously, and then completely stabilize the situation of their alliance. At this time, Moraid was recuperating in another secret base of his. This was the foundation that he really held in his hands now. Adding everything up, Jiang Shangyu calculated again and felt that he was qualified to fight against Li Tianlan. Back to Zhongzhou State. Li Guangtu's pupils contracted slightly for a moment. He stared at Jiang Shangyu closely. Where are we now? If he remembered correctly, this should be in the hinterland of a primeval forest in Nanyun Province in Zhongzhou State. This is the Great Shadow World. Gu Xingyan smiled playfully and answered Li Guangtu's question. Jiang Shangyu didn't say much, but calmly said, "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we should leave." He finally stood up from the grass. "Let's directly." Jiang Shangyu opened his mouth. In the next second, his entire body suddenly stiffened on the spot, and the aura that was circulating freely also abruptly stopped. Gu Xingyan, who was in the same state as him, also completely stiffened. "What's wrong?" Li Guangtu felt nothing. Neither Jiang Shangyu nor Gu Xingyan responded. However, in the next second, a gust of wind blew through the entire village. A sudden gust of wind blew past them with an unusually shrill and strange whistling sound. Under everyone's gaze, the forest that surrounded the village shook continuously. The pitch-black and extremely twisted trees rustled in the wind, and all the leaves pointed towards the north. The village, the forest, and everything else seemed to be completely isolated from the outside world. Vaguely, Li Guangtu felt like he had become a part of the village. At the moment when this feeling rose, he finally felt what Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyan felt at this time. North. Hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of miles away in the north, a cold hostility and bone-piercing killing intent surged over, locking on every inch of land, every person, every living thing, and every leaf in this village. An indescribable killing intent surged between heaven and earth. Li Guangtu's body trembled uncontrollably. It was not fear. It was the sword energy and sword intent in his body that were almost out of control began to boil, strongly affected by the killing intent in the distance. The space was shaking slightly, twisting in a shape visible to the naked eye in front of everyone. The sky was full of killing intent. Jiang Shangyu snorted in a low voice. His voice was indescribably majestic and indifferent. The space around the village became more and more turbulent, and the sky at the edge of the forest became blurred in an instant. But the hostility, which was far away from here, did not dissipate at all. Instead, it grew stronger. It was getting closer and closer. That was an almost incredible speed and determination. "He's coming." Jiang Shangyu suddenly spoke. "Who?" Li Guangtu's eyes narrowed slightly. "Li Tianlan. Or King Wei." Countless strange lights flashed in Jiang Shangyu's eyes. "According to your understanding, you can call him ruthless, or 13-story building, or anything else. But I'm sure it's him. I just don't know if Li Tianlan is there." Gu Xingyan's expression kept changing. Moving the base? It's too late. Jiang Shanyu kept thinking about the deeply buried memory, and there were countless images flashing rapidly in his pupils. His smile was cold and strange. I can't get rid of the enemy's lock. Oh, I remember. Catastrophe, it should be on King Wei. Only half of it. No wonder, no wonder. Has Li Tianlan's hostility and killing intent, and ruthless own energy been restored to this stage? What are you talking about? Li Guangtu's brows furrowed tightly. Jiang Shanyu gave him a serious look. What I want to say is that it's coming. Li Guangtu was speechless for 2 seconds, and asked again, what are you going to do? He didn't understand what Jiang Shanyu was saying, and he was even suspicious of the Li Tianlan he was talking about. The fierce hostility between the heavens and the earth was too strong. It was truly overwhelming. Compared to this kind of momentum, distance was the most important thing. He didn't know how far the enemy was from here, but he had already spread his hostility here. This kind of realm was not what Li Tianlan should have at all. Even he and Ruthless couldn't do it. He had fought with Wang Tianzong and seen the state of the heavenly sun, so he was very sure of this. The enemy is a little too strong. Not so strong. Jiang Shanyu sneered. At this moment, he became more and more strange in Li Guangtu's eyes, and his whole person showed a kind of indescribable weirdness and gloom. Don't be scared by this momentum. It doesn't make sense. No matter who is in the real environment, there is a limit to the combat power they can exert. Catastrophe can directly lock us, which is some kind of space application. Now he is still far away, but under this kind of direct lock, the distance is meaningless. How strong he is right now is how strong you can feel him. Li Guangtu's eyes flickered, and he suddenly said, that's also very strong. Indeed. Jiang Shanyu grinned. But we are not weak either. Since you are here, then stay here forever. He muttered to himself softly, and his smile became more and more twisted. I just need a handy weapon. The cornerstone of the world, is it worthy of me? Countless memories kept surging from the deepest part of his mind. Jiang Shangyu's eyes had been completely occupied by a strange pure black. What everyone didn't know was that, whether it was the space-time corridor or the war god's realm, all the forces in the neutral camp had speculated about Jiang Shanyu was actually a wrong conclusion. Jiang Shanyu had nothing. His own existence was the biggest surprise for the space-time corridor. Or perhaps it was the worst news of all. Chapter 1152. Qingzhou. The rising sun shone through the window, bringing with it a warm feeling. On the sofa on the balcony, a beautiful woman who had just had breakfast was holding her daughter in her arms. She was reading a story to her daughter softly. The 1-year-old baby was lying quietly in the woman's arms, sucking her fingers gently. Her beautiful big eyes blinked as she watched the cartoon in the storybook. Her little body twisted from time to time, looking happy and satisfied. The door of the cloakroom was opened. Hiishue, who had been struggling inside for nearly half an hour, walked out in her pajamas. She sighed and sat on the sofa. She gradually became a little sluggish. She read a thin storybook to her daughter in a gentle voice and picked up another one. She smiled and said, "It's just choosing clothes. Why are you so hesitant?" "I don't like anything." Hiishue scratched her freshly washed hair and shook it. Then she looked at the mother and daughter on the sofa and said with a smile, "Mutong, let's go shopping." No, we should take Xiaoxi out to play. The weather is good today. Auntie just took Xiaoxi out yesterday. Li Mutong was a little helpless. In the end, she sold her rented house and moved in with Hiishue. This was because her good friend in front of her had directly bought the old apartment at a price 20% higher than the market price, and then openly squeezed in with the mother and daughter. The apartment was indeed not big, with an area of 1 bedroom and 1 living room. The mother and daughter usually lived a good life, but now with Hiishue and the auntie who usually took care of the child, the small apartment suddenly became extremely spacious. He Ishui pestered Li Mutong countless times every year. Finally, Li Mutong admitted defeat and moved into the villa with her daughter. They didn't have to pay rent. It was deducted from their salary. After they moved in, their daily life became much more convenient. They went to work at the same time, which was very convenient. The only thing that made He Ishui uncomfortable was that Li Mutong was very punctual. She couldn't sleep in during working hours. The beautiful CEO was dragged to work on time by the beautiful director every day. This was He Ishui's private property. He lived in the same villa area as his parents, so there was no need to hire a housekeeper. When Li Mutong went to work, He Ishui's parents would take care of Li Chaoxi. The mother and daughter's lives seemed to have changed to another place, and then everything became stable again. She's just a kid. Of course, she has to go out and get in touch with the outside world. Otherwise, she'll grow up and become a shut-in. He Ishui moved closer to Li Mutong and poked Li Chaoxi's soft face. Little Chaoxi, I'll take you out to play. How about ice cream? Little Tide grunted and reached out his chubby little hand to grab the storybook. Tell me the story first. Li Mutong smiled and flipped through the storybook in his hand. Her life had always been self-disciplined and disciplined. Other than the occasional gatherings with her colleagues and shopping with He Ishui, there was almost no entertainment. After work, she spent all her time around her daughter, carefully planning the future of the mother and daughter, fine-tuning the direction of the future, and protecting her daughter's growth. It seemed a little sad, but she always showed a faint sense of satisfaction and happiness. He Ishui sat quietly on the side, watching this scene with a smile. His eyes were soft and sincere. After Li Mutong finished the story, he gently carried his daughter down. Little Tide, who was only a little more than 1 year old, could already walk on her own. She opened her little hands, wobbled a few steps, and hugged He Ishui's leg. Since you like children so much, why don't you find a boyfriend, get married, and have your own child? Li Mutong noticed the look in her friend's eyes and teased with a smile. I've given up on men a long time ago. He Ishui, who had a good figure, appearance, education, and background, but had a failed marriage, said casually. He smiled and carried Li Chaoxi up. And now I have Tide. She's your daughter, and also my goddaughter. It's the same. Tide is my biological daughter. Li Mutong wrinkled his nose. He Ishui grunted, thought for 2 seconds, and secretly winked at Li Mutong. Why don't I just marry you, or marry you? I think Zhongzhou state now allows same-sex marriages, right? I remember I've seen similar news before. Nonsense. Li Mutong shook her head helplessly, turned back to her room, and said, I'm going to change. Buzz. Before she could finish speaking, an incomparably intense yet incomparably clear buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the distant sky. It sounded like the whole world was sighing. The sound rolled across the sky and seemed to spread to the whole world in an instant. The bright sunshine outside the window instantly dissipated. While they were still in a daze, colorful lights suddenly shrouded the whole villa. To be exact. In other words, it covered the whole sky of Qingzhou City. Li Mutong suddenly froze on the spot. In her perception, a storm suddenly appeared in the sky, which was not known how far away from Qingzhou City. The storm was shuttling in the sky at an unimaginable speed. It was not hostile, but it carried indescribable majesty and grandeur. At the same time that he sensed it, the storm from an unknown distance had already approached Qingzhou City. Li Mutong, who could be regarded as a master now, could not determine what the storm without any hostility or killing intent meant. The sunshine over Qingzhou was completely blocked. The rainbow-colored radiance was unbridledly spreading in all directions to the west. The dazzling light shone into the villa through the window, penetrating the clouds and sprinkling on the streets. It spread evenly on every street and alley of Qingzhou, dispersing all the shadows. This not very developed but lazy and leisurely city was as beautiful as a dream under the dazzling light. He Ishui was a little dazed and admiring everything around her. She was quiet and lost, just like the state of all the people of Qingzhou who were witnessing everything. Li Chaoxi, who was in her arms, struggled to climb down from her long legs. He walked shakily to the floor-to-ceiling window and held the window with his small hands. Through the dazzling but not blinding light, he quietly looked at the sky outside the window. It was very different from usual. Her eyes were pure and innocent, with a little joy and a touch of calmness that seemed to belong to her but not her. The unscrupulous light swept every inch of Qingzhou. Countless rays of light seemed to be forcibly pushed away from Qingzhou. The sunlight sprinkled down again. This lasted for less than 5 seconds, and everyone still raised their heads subconsciously. After the light, under the sunlight, above the sky, a blurry black dot seemed to be following a straight line, tearing through the sky in an extremely determined manner. It flew all the way and kept moving forward. Wherever the black dot passed, the entire space became blurry. Countless sword chi shadows had been completely stretched into extremely messy pale white lines in the high-speed flight. The lines danced wildly around the black dot, spreading out for dozens of kilometers or even longer. Everything only appeared for an instant. In the next second, the black dot directly passed through the entire sky of Yuzhou City and flew far away. Giggle. In front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the villa, Little Tide, who was watching this scene quietly, suddenly laughed. That voice had the crisp and tender voice of a child, revealing the joy from the heart. This is, Hiishue shook her head hard and looked at the colorful dreamy light around her in a daze. Countless rays of light floated in the villa, mysterious and magnificent. Is this a dream? Hiishue murmured to herself. Li Mutong bit her rosy lower lip and didn't say anything. She was also unable to determine what the light that cut through the sky and the vast and chaotic lines that were as vast as the sea were. Her intuition told her that it was sword chi. But how could there be such a powerful and pure sword chi in the world? There was no fierce hostility or killing intent. It was like the purest ray of light. If it was really sword chi, then how condensed must the killing intent in the sword chi be, so that others couldn't feel it at all? The messy lines that tore through the sky instantly disappeared from the sky of Qingzhou. The sunlight shone into the villa through the window again. The dreamy colorful light was still lingering, becoming more and more dazzling under the sunlight. It's even more beautiful under the sunlight, Hiishue said softly. As soon as she finished speaking, she was stunned. Li Mutong's face changed dramatically. Sunlight? The colorful rainbow just now blocked the sky, and they couldn't see the sunlight at all. Now that the sunlight had appeared again, why was the colorful light still in the villa? Giggle, the crisp sound continued to reverberate in the air. Next to the window, the Little Tide grabbed the railing with one hand and stretched out the other, as if it wanted to touch the sky. Outside the window, the sky was clear. The sword chi swept through Qingzhou, and the few white clouds had been completely evaporated and torn apart. The sunlight shone down from the highest point. The air was cold. The villa was warm. The dreamy colorful light on the streets and alleys of Qingzhou had long disappeared. Only inside the villa, the increasingly dazzling light was still quietly and obediently spreading. From Li Chaoxi's body. Li Mutong and Hiishue slowly lowered their heads, and their incredulous eyes finally fell on the little girl who was only a little more than 1 year old. The little girl was still looking at the sky outside the window. Her eyebrows were shining brightly, and strands of colorful light with indescribable vastness and purity were constantly spreading out from between her eyebrows. She was facing the sunlight outside the window, and her small body had an indescribable holiness, like a little god. The sword chi that covered the sky connected with the mighty colorful light and flew over the sky of Qingzhou in an instant. Ostentatious, unrestrained, and wild, without the slightest bit of concealment. The spatial turbulence of Qingzhou hadn't completely subsided, and Heartless body had directly appeared above the sea. Like the sharpest divine weapon of this era and this world. The sword chi pierced through the sky and crossed the sea. The slightly fluctuating sea surface instantly set off a terrifying tide that was thousands of meters high. From the moment the surging tide rose up, it never fell again. The colorful light kept shining, with terrifying heat and harsh coldness, directly condensing and disintegrating the tide into a large piece of invisible sword chi. Heartless, who had fused with Worryless, was close to completion. In the real environment, although he couldn't recover quickly, he could already absorb a small part of the energy in the real environment. This might not make him stronger, but there was a great possibility that his injuries would recover because of this fusion. The colorful sword chi kept changing. High temperature, cold, thunder, storm. Wherever Heartless went, everything around him turned into sword chi. More and more virtual lines flew around him, covering the sky and covering the earth. They circled around his body and shot out. There were transparent lines, blue lines, orange lines, and pale white lines. The sword chi was endless. The tide was flying on the sea surface. Heartless rushed directly into the plane with the overwhelming sword chi. Forests, grasslands, cities, and highways moved backward crazily. This sword chi that crossed most of Zhongzhou state almost caused a worldwide sensation in the shortest time. Nan Yun arrived almost in a flash. Heartless rushed into the primeval forest and moved forward. The dense forest trembled wildly. As Heartless moved forward, a passage with a width of hundreds of meters appeared directly inside the forest. The black and twisted forest appeared directly in Heartless' perception. Without any pause or hesitation, the sword chi that was flying chaotically in the air suddenly lit up. Countless rays of light burst out with Heartless as the center. Without any hesitation, the sword and light that tore through the sky directly crashed into the dark and twisted primeval forest. Yuzhou. Li Tianlan, who had been thinking silently, suddenly frowned. What's wrong? Qin Weibai and Gu Xianyan sat in front of him and ate breakfast slowly. Noticing his abnormality, Qin Weibai asked. Heartless, Li Tianlan frowned slightly. I can't feel it. It ran around on its own. Did it fly far this time? Qin Weibai blinked her eyes. She had never regarded Heartless as a dead thing. Although he had no prophetic ability, it did not mean that he had no thoughts. Even most of the time, Qin Weibai regarded him as a higher creature at the same level as human beings. Li Tianlan shook his head, a little confused. There were few examples of Heartless running around, and today was the first one. With the current degree of integration between the man and the sword, under normal circumstances, no matter how far Heartless ran, even if he was on the other side of the earth, Li Tianlan could roughly feel his state. But now, the connection between him and Heartless had completely disappeared in that second. Li Tianlan silently lit a cigarette. He was a little confused. But his whole state was still surprisingly calm. In the face of this abnormal phenomenon, there was only a touch of curiosity in his heart. What did Heartless want to do? The connection between them was cut off. Was this Heartless' spontaneous will, or had he entered a special place at this moment? The phone vibrated one after another. Qin Weibai picked up the phone and looked at it. She shook her head and whispered, "He has arrived in Nanyun. It's really fast." Now he seems to have become the focus of most of Zhongzhou state. Some pictures and videos have appeared on the internet. He really doesn't mean to hide himself at all. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little dazed, and he subconsciously whispered, "He has never been a creature who knows how to hide himself." Chapter 1153. Charge. Fight. Kill. The darkness and distortion seemed to violate biology and physics. The forest that should not exist at all appeared in his perception for the first time. The light of all kinds of colors and energies suddenly lit up around Wuqing. Hostility, fighting intent, sword energy, all of them gathered together crazily and turned into undisguised killing intent. In Wuqing's memory, it seemed that he had never maintained such pure concentration and killing intent as he did now. His figure brought with it a dazzling flame as he shuttled back and forth at high speed, and then completely disappeared. The sword shadows all over the sky were completely boiling. At this moment, even he himself had become a killing intent. The ocean-like sword energy crashed into the forest. The space suddenly changed. The sunlight disappeared. The primeval forest that belonged to Nanyun behind him also disappeared. The cold chill completely replaced the warmth of Nanyun, and the chill spread everywhere. This kind of cold was not a drop in temperature, but close to the coldness of touching a corpse to some extent. Dead silence, strange. The chill was constantly expanding, and the surrounding space became more and more viscous in the constant chill. Darkness descended silently in the pitch-black forest. The mighty sword light shone brighter and brighter, forming countless light sources in the forest, almost lighting up the whole forest. A terrifying and powerful energy filled with extreme hostility whistled through the air. Wu Qing's figure went straight forward in the forest. The disorderly and wildly dancing virtual lines destroyed everything in the forest with the monstrous sword intent. The twisted trees were chopped into pieces and turned into floating black gas. There were incomparably shrill screams and wails everywhere between heaven and earth. The sound that came from all directions seemed real and illusory. In the end, it converged into everything, as if the entire world was moaning miserably. The huge sound wave instantly converged into a shock wave visible to the naked eye, spreading along the turbulent space. The sound wave collided with the surging sword light. The space shook violently. The whole forest came alive in an instant. Every pitch-black huge tree in the forest became more and more twisted. The sword light flew in the darkness, annihilating each other with the pitch-black sound wave. Wu Qing's figure reappeared, and more sword light lit up around him again. The sword light kept shuttling in the darkness, and there were more and more. Wu Qing's body seemed to gather an ocean of sword energy. The endless sharpness whistled in the darkness, and the constantly spreading sound wave was completely torn apart. The infinite sword energy with the sword light flew in all directions in an extremely surging manner. The black trees began to move. To be more precise, the entire dark forest seemed to have suddenly gained consciousness. It was a kind of chaotic, gloomy, tyrannical, and absolutely cold will. The temperature of the entire forest plummeted. The branches and leaves between all the huge trees started to grow at a crazy rate, and they were closely connected. The entire forest seemed to have become a single entity under the dancing sword light. Amidst the increasing number of sword lights, the black tree branches that filled every corner of Fang Xingzhan's field of vision swatted down crazily, wiping out a large number of sword lights. Wu Qing still did not stop. Speed up. It kept accelerating. Light surged around him, and his entire body seemed to be burning. All the sword lights in the distance seemed to have been completely devoured by the dark forest. The chaotic and endless sword chi circled around Wu Qing, but it did not spread out in all directions. His seemingly endlessly accelerating figure paused for the first time. The acceleration came without warning. There was also no sign of a pause. His body seemed to defy the laws of physics and stopped in place. The sword light was like a dragon. It rose from his feet and shot up into the sky. The sky was completely covered by countless branches and leaves. It was pitch black. And the sky above the branches and pages was also pitch black, almost like nothingness. Wu Qing put up one hand. The ocean-like sword chi boiled again. The seemingly limitless sword chi completely surrounded his body, layer after layer. He stood in the center of the sword chi. From a distance, Wu Qing looked like a constantly circling tornado around him. The sword chi tornado expanded wildly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Wu Qing stood in the eye of the storm. The sword chi tornado spread straight. Tens of meters, hundreds of meters, thousands of meters. The terrifying sword chi storm almost became spectacular in an instant. 1 second. Wu Qing kept the posture of putting up one hand. The sword lights that seemed to be spreading in all directions were actually converging. They converged with him as the center. For the time being, he still did not understand what this dark and distorted domain meant. But the world had its own rules. Whether it was light or darkness, they both had sharpness and energy. Wu Qing's fingers were slightly bent. In the dark, twisted forest, the endless sword lights vibrated at the same time. Flame, frost, thunder, storm, darkness, light, space, everything and all the energy condensed to the extreme at the same time with Wu Qing's movements. The essence of the world was the rules. It was also energy. A spot of light that shone to the extreme directly lit up in Wu Qing's hand. His body stood in the air, and his black windbreaker fluttered unscrupulously in the cold wind. Wu Qing pointed forward with his raised palm. It was just a simple finger. Boom! An incomparably violent roar exploded in the twisted forest without any warning. It was like an overwhelming tsunami. Like a thunder rolling across the sky. Countless sword lights turned into the purest form of energy, exploding out majestically from Wu Qing's fingertips. The moment the light lit up, the pure energy had directly torn the twisted forest tens of thousands of meters in front of him. Countless dark giant trees evaporated crazily in the light, turning into a black airflow. A huge gap was directly penetrated in the twisted forest. Wu Qing was motionless, maintaining the posture of one hand forward. More and more violent energy poured out in an unreserved way with him as the center, surging in the forest. The extremely dazzling light moved forward wildly, as if someone had reached out and grabbed an ocean, pouring the huge tide directly into the forest. It was earth-shattering. The wantonly surging energy tsunami was like a torrent that could destroy everything. The twisted forest was torn apart. The extremely abundant light carried with it an absolute destructive and penetrative power as it moved forward. In 2 seconds, the twisted forest was penetrated from front to back. Wu Qing's windbreaker fluttered for a moment. He took a step forward, and his whole body appeared directly in front of the old and strange village. The huge and endless twisted forest behind him was constantly evaporating under the impact of absolute energy. The darkness began to gradually dim, turning into a black mist all over the sky. A large amount of mist and pure energy were constantly entangled. More mist began to gather toward the village. To be exact, it was gathering toward a person in the village. Jiang Shangyu sat quietly on the roof of a house in the village, looking at Wu Qing standing outside the village with a smile. His voice was slow and relaxed, without any emotion. King Wei, in your current state, can you cut my order? Chapter 1154. No rules, this was the main theme of chaos. But no rules, was also a kind of order. Maybe everyone couldn't understand it, but they couldn't deny its existence. The gloomy and twisted forest was torn apart in the monstrous energy. Endless black mist gathered around Jiang Shangyu. The black mist surrounded the village, layer upon layer. It was not a short time. But Wu Qing never moved. The amazing killing intent continued to gather in him and climb to the peak in the shortest time. But he didn't move. It was not that he didn't want to. It was that he couldn't. He couldn't. In less than half a minute, he wanted to burst out the energy in his body countless times, destroy the village, and kill all the creatures. That was what he thought, and that was what he did. But in reality, he didn't move at all. This was the order of chaos. He couldn't adapt. His inner thoughts and actual actions were in conflict without any rhyme or reason. The order of chaos was spreading unscrupulously, and finally reached a certain limit. If one couldn't get rid of this order for a long time, he would be assimilated by chaos. That was the end that no one could escape. In the deepest chaos, even Huang Shi, the strongest in the history of the human clan, would be transformed into a shadow creature if she fell into chaos. The misty energy completely wrapped Wu Qing's body. The amazing killing intent was slowly falling back. But in the order of chaos, Wu Qing's will became more and more condensed. The black mist gathered on Jiang Shangyu and began to spread from him. Finally, it surrounded the entire village. The black mist seemed to be real and began to build a shape in the air. In less than half a minute, the village in front of Wu Qing had completely disappeared. What appeared in front of him was a war fortress that was completely made of black mist. The fortress was not illusory. It seemed to be real under the accumulation of countless black mist. Jiang Shangyu's figure appeared at the top of the fortress, and he snapped his fingers with a smile on his face. Boom! The loud noise was earth-shattering. The appearance of the fortress standing between heaven and earth suddenly changed. Muzzles appeared one after another on the thick walls. All kinds of weapons extended from every corner of the fortress, aiming at Wu Qing's body. Fire. The raging artillery fire smashed down in an instant, drowning everything. Black energy that was constantly exploding and destroying was everywhere. The incredible destructive power seemed to ignite the entire space in an instant. Heartless figure finally moved. He wanted to fight back. But when he did that, he suddenly took a step back. There was no defense at all. Countless black energies exploded around his body, drowning everything. Jiang Shangyu smiled calmly and appreciated everything in front of him. His smiling eyes carried an indescribable sense of anticipation. He had a considerable understanding of the current Heartless. Heartless state was much more complete than he had imagined. However, his injuries and the restrictions he received in the real world remained the same. He sensed the aura of catastrophe from Wu Qing. But even the catastrophe wasn't complete at the moment, and in the real world, the effects of the catastrophe were limited. Jiang Shangyu had become a chaotic creature. His greatest source of combat power was the chaotic laws. In terms of space, this place could no longer be regarded as Zhongzhou state, but it was still absolutely affected by the real environment. In the chaotic rules, Jiang Shangyu was completely at home. His strength could vaguely break through the restrictions of the real environment, and he could also use the real environment and the chaotic order to the greatest extent to suppress Heartless. Heartless was no match for him. Because he knew Heartless state better. And the entire space-time corridor didn't know his state at this time. The dark energy twisted and exploded wildly. At the very center of the explosion, a hot and dazzling light finally burst out. After countless attempts and explorations, Heartless finally made a sword move. Under the chaotic rules, his idea was self-destruction, and the action that came with this idea was a full outbreak. His body instantly tightened. The surging energy surged with him as the center. His energy had been restored to the peak state. The outbreak at this moment was completely equivalent to 13 murderous weapons firing at the same time. The constantly erupting energy gathered into a thick and dazzling beam of light. The moment the beam of light lit up, the energy that had been suppressed to the extreme had fiercely hit the Black Fortress. Plug it. The Black Fortress shook violently. The black mist fluctuated, and a large number of weapons were directly deformed and twisted under the impact of the beam of light. Jiang Shangyu took a step forward. The entire stronghold was one with him. As he advanced, the stronghold changed again. In the blink of an eye, the originally huge black stronghold expanded to a towering scale. It was already comparable to a small or medium-sized city. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth, but there was no emotion in his eyes. He took a deep look at Heartless and twisted his neck. The next second, a black trench coat that was exactly the same as Heartless appeared on his body. A kind of energy that Heartless was extremely familiar with but extremely disgusting bloomed in Jiang Shangyu's hands. It was a colorful and incomparably gorgeous energy. The moment the colorful luster appeared, it turned black in Jiang Shangyu's hands. Jiang Shangyu laughed. He took a step forward again. The distance of hundreds of meters seemed to not exist at all. The moment his feet fell, Jiang Shangyu had directly appeared in front of Heartless. The mighty black energy instantly turned into a boundless ocean. Jiang Shangyu put his fingers together like a sword. He stabbed straight. The extremely sharp sword energy completely burst out from his fingertips, tearing everything apart. Heartless' body suddenly moved a distance of hundreds of meters. The sharp sword light almost brushed his body and shot out from his side. Jiang Shangyu casually withdrew his palm and said with a smile, "How about it? I'm using your energy. Are you familiar with it?" The majestic and incredible energy emanated from Jiang Shangyu's body. No, to be exact, it should be pouring out. Aimlessly and without reservation. The surging black energy became a raging tide. He didn't even attack, but just vented the energy in his body to his heart's content. As he continued to consume energy, Heartless' aura obviously began to weaken. "You are destined to be my divine weapon," Jiang Shanyu said calmly. He didn't want to destroy Heartless. At this moment, he completely connected himself with Heartless' energy. Now, what he squandered every minute and second was all energy belonging to Heartless. When this energy was squandered, Heartless would just be a sword. In the chaotic order, it would become Jiang Shanyu's sword of chaos. Chapter 1155. Complete synchronization of survival, complete sharing of energy. At this moment, Jiang Shanyu became ruthless. The man and the sword appeared to be two individuals, but in reality, they were already one person. They were all humans, or rather, they were all swords. With Wu Qing's current state, unless he used the most extreme method, there was no possibility of getting out of this state. The fortress, the city, and the sky was filled with black fog. Everything around him was Jiang Shanyu's own domain. In terms of space, he had left Zhongzhou state in a sense. In his own domain, he could get rid of the influence of the real environment. This so-called getting rid of might be very, very small. It didn't even increase the upper limit of one's combat power by much. But in his chaos domain, he already had the ability to break free from the influence of the real environment. In other words, in this domain, he gained an ability that shouldn't exist in the real world for a short period of time. There were many versions of this ability under the starry sky. A full-scale invasion. Deep-level invasion. No matter how it was called, invasion was the essence. The moment he approached Ruthless, Jiang Shanyu directly invaded Ruthless' fate node. Heartless was essentially a rock. But he had his own will and thoughts, so he was still alive. Life naturally had its own destiny. The moment his fate was invaded, all the energy in Wu Qing's body was shared with Jiang Shanyu. And Jiang Shanyu didn't even need to fight. The only thing he needed to do was to squander. Unscrupulous squandering. Colorful energy kept flashing on Jiang Shanyu's body. The moment the light flashed, it directly turned dark. Jiang Shanyu's body slightly tightened, and he slowly rose into the air. Withstanding the merciless and boundless unimaginable energy, a large amount of black light surged out from his body. Black energy poured into the sky, toward the ground, and strengthened the black city in Jiang Shanyu's domain. Under the impact of the huge energy, Jiang Shanyu's face was a little pale, but his eyes were full of excitement, even a little fanaticism. "Is this your power?" Wu Qing's shadow was reflected in his eyes, and his smile was full of mockery. King Wei truly lives up to his reputation. If you are truly complete, there is no doubt that you will be able to reach the imperial capital directly. Reaching the upper limit of combat power in the real world. But it doesn't matter. I like imperfections, and I like imperfections. When your energy is exhausted, I will return it to you. With you here, even Li Tianlan is no match for me. He spoke from the bottom of his heart. Only in this secret base could Jiang Shanyu's strength be maximized. Only in this way could he turn his domain into a city, or even a world of his own. Only in this way could he invade the ruthless fate node. If he left here, the limit of the combat capability he could exert was beyond the peak of the invincible realm, but it was not close to the supreme level. This kind of strength was no match for Li Tianlan now. But with Wu Qing, it was completely different. This was his domain. He could return the energy he squandered in his domain to Wu Qing. But only if the merciless energy is used up here. He sank into the order of the shadow and became his divine weapon. At that time, coupled with Heartless, whose energy was at its peak, even if he left this place, he would still be invincible. What did Li Tianlan have to fear? Majestic black light whistled and danced in the battlefield. Wu Qing's body shook violently, as if he was struggling. Jiang Shanyu smiled and snapped his fingers. Right now, he was bearing the weight of a heartless fate. The two of them could be said to be one. Thus, as the black light scattered, Wu Qing's entire body suddenly erupted with a dazzling colorful energy. A large amount of energy spread in all directions without any purpose. To be exact, it was a purposeless waste. Wu Qing's aura continued to weaken at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not only was Jiang Shanyu squandering his energy, but he was also forcing Wu Qing to squander his energy. The light lingered between the two of them. The contrast between the brilliance and the darkness was shocking. In the messy light and shadow, Wu Qing's stiff body moved little by little, and he slowly raised his head. Jiang Shangyu's figure clearly appeared in his perception. He observed silently, as if taking a deep look at him. Although he had no facial features and no eyes. 10 minutes. This was the conclusion he came to. It was an extremely accurate conclusion, and the error would not exceed 3 seconds. If he and Jiang Shanyu squandered their energy at the same time, in 10 minutes at most, his combat capability would plummet. Then, he would drop to a whole new level. Within 20 minutes, all of his energy would be used up. This place isolated Li Tianlan's perception. At that time, his only end was to sink in the shadow. I remember that you seem to have another choice. Jiang Shanyu narrowed his eyes and looked straight at Wu Qing. But I don't quite remember, but you can try. His reminder was full of malice and mockery. Wu Qing was still quietly perceiving Jiang Shanyu's state. He knew that he had another choice. Countless humiliating memories suddenly began to surge in the center of his mind. Instead of sinking in the shadow, it was better to face the past. Wu Qing reached forward. In an instant, the colorful energy on his body completely solidified. The black windbreaker fluttered violently. In the upright hood of the windbreaker, there were 2 golden lights as bright as fire suddenly appeared on the head of the windbreaker, which was originally empty. It was sharp and shining. It was the light that could penetrate everything. Jiang Shanyu's figure was directly shrouded in the golden light, and the energy around him instantly solidified. Wu Qing was changing. He kept changing. The windbreaker, which was fluttering wildly, slowly disappeared. Wu Qing showed his real body. The raging energy kept whistling around him, slowly but firmly getting rid of the shackles of the chaotic order. Jiang Shangyu's invasion was purified. In the strong light, Wu Qing's figure completely changed into another appearance. He wore the golden pheasant's plume on his head, the golden armor on his body, and the cloud silk shoes on his feet. His eyes were shining, and his cloak was fluttering. The light was still refracting forward. For the first time, a weapon appeared in Wu Qing's outstretched hand. But it was not a sword. It was a golden stick that was close to his height. The soaring fighting intent and killing intent were surging. That was the immortal presumptuousness and arrogance. Lawless. Wu Qing, whose appearance had changed dramatically, stared at Jiang Shanyu, and the golden light in his eyes kept shining. This was the last appearance he wanted to remember. But it was the best way to get out of the current situation. This was his state of order. It was also the state in which he had been assimilated by order. This was absolute coldness and law. Chapter 1156. Order was the most basic structure of the world, and also the most essential structure. It could not be changed or destroyed. Unlike the swaying and struggling neutrality, the absolute state of order could only accommodate true order. It did not accept chaos, nor did it accept neutrality. The golden light shone in ruthless eyes. In an instant, the weakness of Jiang Shanyu's domain had been completely revealed in his sight. At the same time, at the moment when the golden light shone, all the colorful sword energy completely disappeared from Ruthless' body. All the sword energy dissipated from his body. Absolute order could not tolerate anything outside the order. Naturally, it could not tolerate the divine form of the neutral camp. Amidst the clear shattering sound, the half-catastrophe turned into a colorful flowing light, clearly condensing into a colorful pair of wings behind Wu Qing's back. The bright red cloak swayed slightly in the chaotic domain. The moment the colorful wings were formed, they left Ruthless' body directly. Ignoring the order, ignoring the chaos, even ignoring distance and space, the wings flapped, and disappeared instantly with a flash of flowing light. Without the colorful energy, Ruthless' figure looked clearer and more real. His face was completely shrouded in the golden light, but countless golden hairs grew all over his body. Jiang Shangyu's invasion was completely cleaned up by the order. Ruthless kept taking deep breaths, and the energy that had not dissipated in time in the surrounding space merged into his body bit by bit again. Jiang Shangyu looked at all this calmly. He seemed to think of something and whispered softly, "King Wei's equal to heaven. In the neutral camp, he was King Wei. In the order camp, his original title was equal to heaven. Shoulder to shoulder with heaven and earth." This was the peerless madman who had turned the entire order camp upside down with his own strength. To some extent, this was almost equal to Ruthless' strongest state at this time. Shame, anger, depression. Vague scenes of the past began to flash in Ruthless' mind. The shining golden light in his eyes began to become chaotic. Ruthless' whole person became more and more fierce in the state of absolute anger. "You," the hoarse and fierce voice sounded between heaven and earth without any warning. It seemed that because he hadn't spoken for a long time, the voice seemed a little rigid, but the killing intent between the lines filled the entire domain. "Damn, you!" Buzz. The space in the domain suddenly vibrated. Ruthless' whole body bloomed with golden light. The golden rod smashed into the ground. A large amount of black mist quickly dissipated. Wu Qing raised the staff in his hand, his aura soaring to the sky. That was the unbridled and unruliness that had long been imprinted in the legends of time, a legend that existed between reality and illusion. Order was everywhere. In the order state, Ruthless instantly broke through the combat power limits of the real environment. The golden rod expanded crazily. 3 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters, a few hundred meters. The golden cudgel was spreading wildly, growing longer and thicker. What the F***ck am I writing? A giant golden pillar suddenly appeared in the dark domain. His merciless figure continued to grow along with the enlarging golden staff, standing tall between heaven and earth. The domain was filled with an absolutely brutal killing intent. Wu Qing raised both of his hands up high, grasping the staff that was already as big as a mountain, and smashed it down with a furious roar. There was no goal, no direction. In just a few seconds, the golden rod had filled every inch of space in the black domain. The air exploded completely in the brandishing of the rod, bursting into pieces of explosions. The space was burning in the huge force and extreme speed, and the dark domain instantly became fiery red. Jiang Shangyu's figure stood there, as small as an ant. The city-sized black fortress was still standing, but under the mountain-like rod, it was as ridiculous as a matchbox. The rod smashed down completely. It was earth-shattering. Heaven and earth and the domain trembled at the same time under the huge force, and the loud roar turned into an unparalleled huge sound wave sweeping in all directions. It was as if the black fortress of the city was constantly collapsing and disintegrating. A large number of weapons were completely obliterated, and the darkness was turbulent. The merciless figure that tore the whole city apart with one blow quickly shrank, and his golden eyes were always fixed on Jiang Shangyu's figure. Charge! The golden afterimage flashed in an instant, and the next second, the golden rod, which had become the size of a normal weapon, appeared directly above Jiang Shangyu's head. Bang! In the dull sound, the almost indestructible rod smashed hard on Jiang Shangyu's forehead. There was no splattering of brains and blood as usual. Jiang Shangyu blinked his eyes directly. A low hillside 100 meters behind him collapsed directly, raising smoke and dust all over the sky. Chaos. It was chaos again. Jiang Shangyu used the chaos to effect the order here. After all, this was his domain. So the merciless blow was also affected. The rod that hit his head was directly twisted, and all the power was distorted to the back. Merciless snorted coldly. The shadow of the rod all over the sky smashed down with his voice. In an instant, the shadow of the golden rod was everywhere in the sky and on the ground. This was an all-round suppression. Jiang Shangyu did not move. It also distorted the order around him. Then he smiled softly. Cracks that could be seen with the naked eye appeared in the distorted space under the countless attacks. Jiang Shanyu could no longer see Merciless' figure. Or rather, Merciless was everywhere. His shadow was everywhere in the sky and on the ground. The violent attacks with great power smashed down from all kinds of unimaginable places, and every landing point was the weak point of this distorted space. Even though Merciless' state was now weakened and his body was incomplete, this distorted space could only protect him for less than 10 seconds at most. I like you more and more. Jiang Shanyu looked at Merciless, who was everywhere in the sky and on the ground, and said with a smile. As the earliest divine weapon who followed Huang Shi, Merciless had received Huang Shi's teaching for the longest time. In terms of the art of fighting alone, even Great Emperor Xianyuan was not necessarily his match at the same level. If it weren't for this, during the years when he was assimilated by Order, the Order camp would not have called him the Great Fighting Sage, or the Fighting Celestial Lord. In several terminations and reincarnations, since Merciless left the Order camp, the position of the Fighting Celestial Lord had been empty, which undoubtedly made sense. The Fighting Celestial Lord was a title. But this was the title of the Order camp. Different from the neutral camp. The strong men of the neutral camp could split the land and be crowned king. They really stood at the peak, like the god of war and the human emperor, and could even form a space of their own. In the time corridor, there were also dukes, generals, and all kinds of titles. These titles followed a certain order, but not absolute order. In the absolute order, each title represented a unique rule. This was the nature of the world. After King Wei successfully left the Order camp, the position of the Fighting Celestial Lord had been empty. There was no doubt that this meant that no one in the Order camp could catch up with King Wei in the art of fighting. It also meant that in the Order camp, the title of the Fighting Celestial Lord still belonged to King Wei. This could not be changed, even the Order itself could not change this. And this was what Jiang Shanyu wanted to take advantage of. Are you forgetting something? Jiang Shanyu chuckled. Your title, the Fighting Celestial Lord. A ray of extremely dazzling golden light directly flew out from Jiang Shanyu. The golden light was almost the same as the golden light on Merciless. The distorted space around that was about to break began to stabilize the moment the golden light appeared. Jiang Shanyu raised his hands. A large amount of golden light kept shining and gathering in his hands, becoming clear and solid. The golden light shining on Jiang Shanyu suddenly flickered. In the golden light, Merciless' pupils suddenly contracted. He suddenly tightened his body and stared at Jiang Shanyu. Jiang Shanyu still lowered his head. In his hands, in the dense golden light, a thick golden book gradually appeared. Jiang Shanyu lowered his head and silently turned to the first page of the book. Countless names flowed across the golden page, and then instantly turned into a blank. Jiang Shanyu smiled and looked at Merciless. Do you know what this is? Merciless stood in the void, holding the stick in his hand tightly, and was silent for a long time. Jiang Shanyu lowered his head and flipped through the book in his hand unhurriedly. I see. Merciless' stiff voice suddenly sounded. After I woke up, I always thought that you were eroded by the shadow, or even controlled by the unknown, but now. He looked at the thick and ancient book in Jiang Shanyu's hand. Of course, he knew what it was. This was one of the most powerful divine weapons in the Order camp. Of course, the book that appeared in Jiang Shanyu's hand was not real, but a projection distorted by chaotic rules. But Jiang Shanyu could directly distort the projection of the divine weapon of the Order camp. This level meant that Jiang Shanyu was not eroded by the shadow at all, nor was he controlled by the unknown. His own existence. It was the unknown. Chapter 1157. A very strange feeling came from the thinking center. Wu Qing silently looked at Jiang Shanyu in front of him, and his mind was full of absurd emotions. Jiang Shanyu was unknown. The unknown was Jiang Shanyu. There was no control, no possession, nothing speculated by Time Corridor and War God Realm. Jiang Shanyu might have experienced those speculations before, but now, there was no need to distinguish Jiang Shangyu from the unknown. The two were completely one. Wu Qing couldn't understand how this happened at all. More than half of his memories were still incomplete. But he understood that the unknown was an extremely terrible thing. In the vast starry sky, if the end of the world was the limit of destructive power, then the unknown, in a sense, was the limit of combat power. From the perspective of the three camps, the unknown was not necessarily the strongest, but it was undeniable that the strongest had always been the unknown. This was the real top creature of the starry sky. With Jiang Shangyu? Fusion? Why? It was obvious that Jiang Shangyu still had his own consciousness. And the real shadow creature, their consciousness might be awake, but their self-awareness was constantly changing. This constant change included gender, personality, identity, and even species that could change at any time. But Jiang Shangyu had always been Jiang Shangyu. What did this mean? Wu Qing couldn't understand it at all for a while. And what he couldn't understand was, since Jiang Shangyu was the unknown, why was Miracle City still safe and sound until now? It was undeniable that the human clan and even the entire neutral camp were at a disadvantage in front of order and shadow. It could even be said that it was a great disadvantage. Since the existence of the human clan, they had been struggling to survive. They worked hard for their own survival when they knew there was no hope. So far, from Huangshi to the current Great Emperor Shenyuan, in terms of the overall situation, the human clan had not won. They barely had a sliver of the ability to survive. This was the trump card of the neutral camp. And there were only two most important trump cards in the neutral camp. The first was the real environment. The second was the end of the world. The former could guarantee the return of the strong, and the latter was related to the survival of the camp. Any planet with a real environment. Order and shadow were thorns in their eyes. If Jiang Shangyu was the unknown, he should destroy Miracle City as soon as possible. But now, Miracle City was still safe and sound. Wu Qing was silent and motionless, but his breath was with more and more obvious doubts. I know what you want to ask. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, when you become my divine weapon, I will tell you. He flipped the ancient golden page in his hand. Amidst the rustling sounds, an incomparably dazzling golden light was reflected from the page, establishing a connection with Wu Qing in the unseen world. A few incomparably ancient and majestic words appeared on the golden page. Those words looked like pure and original symbols, but everyone could understand them. The Battlemaster Heavenly Lord, Heaven's Equal. Jiang Shangyu's eyes flickered. The connection between those words and Heartless had completely stabilized in that instant. Black blood flowed out of Jiang Shangyu's fingers as he flipped the pages of the book. The blood was like a thread, quickly sketching on the paper. The words, Heavenly Battle Heavenly Venerate, automatically appeared at the top of the page. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth. The black blood once again outlined a few symbols that everyone could understand on the golden page. Confer Heartless the title of Shadow Angel and grant him the power of Shadow. Buzz. The whole domain kept surging. In Jiang Shangyu's domain, countless shadow powers appeared around Wu Qing in an instant, enveloping him and trying to merge with him. At this moment, Wu Qing had temporarily lost his divine catastrophe. In the face of erosion, he could not hold on for long. The black blood continued to sketch on the golden page. Confer Heartless the title of Angel of Peace and grant him a peaceful state of mind. Wu Qing's figure suddenly froze, and all his struggles suddenly weakened a lot. The black lines were sketched frantically. Jiang Shangyu's breath gradually declined, and the domain of darkness also began to shake slightly. However, the number of conferments continued to increase. This seemingly gorgeous ancient book was one of the absolute core artifacts in the Order camp. It recorded the Order at the lowest level. The most terrible thing about it was that even the most powerful figures could not escape the influence of the Order in the book. At the same time, it was also an artifact that controlled countless superiors in the Order camp from the neutral camp. At the same time, it was also an artifact that controlled countless superiors who joined the Order camp from the neutral camp. And this book, in the real environment of Zhongzhou State, also had a name that was almost a household name. It was called the List of Deification. Although the List of Deification in Jiang Shangyu's hand was not the real thing, it was just a projection. But at this time, in his domain, even if it was just a projection, it was enough to control Wu Qing for a certain period of time. This was the most worry-saving way. The black domain kept shaking. The golden book in Jiang Shangyu's hand completely burst into a golden light that was hard to look at directly. The light completely pierced the darkness and turned into huge chains of order one after another. All the chains were wrapped around Wu Qing's body, layer after layer. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and looked at Wu Qing, who was constantly struggling in front of him. His eyes were full of expectation. Wu Qing's speculation was not wrong. He was indeed an unknown. But not as Wu Qing thought. Because the unknown did not control him, and he did not devour the unknown. The fusion between the two sides was a natural merger under extremely accidental circumstances. He did not want to completely destroy Miracle City. There were many of his memories here. But the most important reason was that although he was now an unknown, to some extent, he could no longer be regarded as a pure shadow creature. His current state could be said to be unprecedented. It was between the shadow and the neutral camp. This also meant that he could also get what the human clan had always relied on from the real environment. That was what he was studying now. If he could also get the truth, then from the perspective of the shadow camp, he could be regarded as a real change of fate against the will of heaven. If everything went well, then he would become the #1 superior under the whole starry sky. Huang Shi, Xianyuan, God of War, Human Emperor, Doomsday. All the combat effectiveness that could represent the peak would be left far behind by him. Give up resisting. Jiang Shangyu smiled slowly. The golden chain was tied to Wu Qing. Black shadows had spread all over Wu Qing's body. He gradually became quiet. Jiang Shangyu stretched out his hand and made a gesture of holding a sword. Chapter 1158. When Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian arrived at the hotel restaurant slowly, Li Tianlan had already eaten the 9th basket of crystal dumplings under Gu Xinyan's stunned gaze. The hotel's crystal dumplings were extremely famous and fragrant. As a large carnivore, Li Tianlan liked them very much. Since he had a second heart, his demand for food had increased day by day. The new heart was not fully formed, so it beat extremely slowly. But every beat consumed a lot of energy, which made Li Tianlan's appetite completely like a bottomless pit. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Li Tianlan wanted, he could eat all day, even for several days, without stopping. So, this child is your spy in Kunlun City a few years ago? Li Tianlan looked at Gu Xianyan and said slowly after taking a sip of sweet soybean milk. Yes. Qin Weibai nodded and smiled. It's not easy at all, especially when I found Xianyan. It took me a lot of time to enter Kunlun City and become Gu Xianyan's student. It seems easy, but in fact, she paused and said with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work." Xianyan is willing. Gu Xianyan sat beside Qin Weibai with a serious face and said in a soft voice. Li Tianlan looked at her thoughtfully and nodded. She does look a little different. This difference was not in appearance, but in a feeling that Li Tianlan could now perceive but could not describe. This feeling was very faint, but it really existed, clearly telling him that Gu Xianyan was completely different from other people of the same age. It's luck, right? Qin Weibai touched Gu Xianyan's head. And spiritual power. Although Xianyan is young, in terms of spiritual power, she can barely be called a master. Spiritual domain? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly. If I'm fully prepared, I can already hypnotize an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Of course, the hypnotized state of the opponent is not very stable. I have to give them enough hints to form a spiritual cage and then constantly strengthen the cage. Li Tianlan didn't understand at all, but the words, "can hypnotize an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm," and Gu Xinyan's age still had a considerable impact. This could also explain why Gu Xianyan, as a student of Gu Xianyan, could easily get rid of bodyguards and come to Yuzhou with the protection of a master. He nodded in appreciation. Not bad. What Xianyan said today was only a small part of it. She knows a lot of secrets of Kunlun City, which is also the main reason why I put her in Kunlun City. As Qin Weibai spoke, she paused for a moment. A trace of regret appeared on her dreamy and exquisite face, but there was also some contradictory pride on her face. Under normal circumstances, if all these things are exposed, it can completely shake the foundation of Kunlun City, and even make them disappear completely. Unfortunately. She shook her head slightly. Li Tianlan understood what she meant. He also knew what she was feeling sorry for. Li Huaqing's attitude was very obvious. All this was because he and Emperor Dong's palace had grown too fast. Li Tianlan was completely sure that if Emperor Dong's palace hadn't merged with the Flourishing Age Fund, the new group wouldn't have taken shape, and Emperor Dong's palace would still have been developing quietly in Xianyuan City, and he wouldn't have been invincible in the world, but just maintained the combat capability at the peak of the invincible realm. Then the result today would have been different. The speed of his and Emperor Dong's palace's growth was both a good and a bad thing. The integration of the Flourishing Age Fund and Emperor Dong's palace made Emperor Dong's palace the top force in Zhongzhou State. The edge of the Wang family of Beihai was gradually shrinking, and Emperor Dong's palace had influenced all aspects. The Flourishing Age Fund led the new group to enter Tiannan, and the strong support of the giant group completely stabilized the new group. Individual combat capability, power scale, wealth, prospects, and potential, Emperor Dong's palace now had everything it wanted. Even the foundation, which might not be enough because of the Li family, was not nothing. Such growth would naturally make the whole Zhongzhou state uneasy. As the president, it was Li Huaqing's most basic responsibility to restrict Emperor Dong's palace, which had nothing to do with personal preferences. So the parliament needed to find an opponent for Li Tianlan. The Wang family of Beihai was naturally not suitable. The other party was not stupid. Now Wang Xingxiao's growth had made up for the shortcomings of the top combat capability of the Wang family of Beihai. After the final battle in Beihai, what they needed to do most was to recuperate and temporarily shrink their edge. Without the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City was the only choice. Gu Xingyun couldn't stop Li Tianlan. But there was no other candidate in Zhongzhou State now, so it could only be Gu Xingyun. The parliament would definitely increase its support for Kunlun City. When Gu Xingyun gave Li Tianlan more constraints, it would be okay, even if it was only temporary. Li Huaqing expressed such an attitude today. All mistakes, regardless of whether they were absurd or outrageous, had to be suppressed first. Compared with Gu Xingyun, Li Tianlan was a problem they needed to pay more attention to. So now, although Kunlun City seemed to be in a precarious situation, with Li Tianlan's normalcy and the growth of the new group, it was the most stable time since its establishment. At least in a short time, before Zhongzhou State had a better candidate and a way to restrict Li Tianlan, Gu Xingyun's existence was irreplaceable. Because of this, Gu Xianyan only told a small part of the secrets about Kunlun City in front of the giants this time. She did know a lot of things. But it didn't make sense whether she said it or not. Even if the higher-ups knew, they would choose to suppress all these things. So it was better to hide it and let Emperor Dong's palace use these secrets to seek other benefits. It's okay. Li Tianlan smiled and remembered what Li Huaqing said before the meeting ended. He said calmly, "I'm waiting for the president to give me an explanation." Qin Weibai touched Gu Xinyan's head unconsciously and suddenly said with a smile, "Xianyan will be in Emperor Dong's palace from now on." "Tianlan, what's your plan?" Li Tianlan was stunned and then shook his head. "I don't have any plan. Get used to it for a while. Just tell me what you want to do." He put the last steamed bun into his mouth. Qin Weibai just wanted to say something. She glanced around and saw Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian walking in slowly. Qin Weibai blinked and pulled Gu Xianyan to stand up. She said with a smile, "Let's go." I'll take you to see if there are other delicious food. Gu Xianyan agreed and was pulled away by Qin Weibai obediently. Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian sat opposite Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked at them and said nothing. Ahem, Xianyuan Wushang coughed awkwardly. Big brother, you have a good appetite. Yes. Li Tianlan was calm. What's the matter with Wuqing? What was going on with Wuqing? This was probably the question that every high-level and even countless people in Zhongzhou state were discussing at this time. Li Tianlan didn't know what was going on. But his intuition told him that all this seemed to have something to do with Xianyuan Wushang. Well, Xianyuan Wushang hesitated. Tell me the truth. Li Tianlan said blandly. Xianyuan Wushang coughed again and hesitated. Finally, he said, he went to see Jiang Shangyu. Chapter 1159. Li Tianlan finally realized that there was something wrong with his state. Wu Qing went to find Jiang Shangyu. This was definitely an answer beyond his expectation. But now he was not surprised at all. In other words, he was surprised, but his mood was always as calm as water, without any fluctuation. Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, the names of the enemies flashed in his mind one by one, but his mood was still calm and indifferent, even a little lazy. Go to find Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan calmly agreed and slowly took a bite of the side dish. He seemed to enjoy it very much. This was very peaceful. Xianyuan Wushang was a little helpless and continued, Brother, Jiang Shangyu is problematic. We even think that he will become your strongest opponent here. His threat is much greater than the entire Wang family of Beihai. Wu Qing can feel your thoughts. He locked on to Jiang Shangyu's position and directly took action. Li Tianlan agreed again and said lightly, Jiang Shangyu is no match for Wang Xingshao now. Li Tianlan was undoubtedly the most qualified to judge the combat capability, especially the combat capability of several peak figures in the dark world today. From his current perspective, if he didn't count himself, Wang Xingshao, who was in a special state now, could be regarded as the strongest in the dark world. After Wang Xingshao, Li Kuangtu, who had recovered from his injury and was in his peak state, could rank second. In a battle of life and death, he might not lose to Wang Xingshao. After Li Kuangtu, it was Lin Fengting in his peak state. Lin Fengting's actual combat power was not lower than Li Kuangtu's, but a lifetime of idleness made his character less fierce and cold, and more gentle and leisurely, so he was ranked behind Li Kuangtu. After Lin Yuxian, the fourth or fifth place could be Jiang Shangyu's turn. In addition, there was a mysterious master whom Li Tianlan could not figure out for the time being. He had always been thinking about the young man who suddenly rescued Wang Xingshao above Emperor Dong's palace a few days ago. They were both young, had the same sword energy, and the same reincarnation breaking. Xianyuan Wushang said his name was Lin Shi, but he knew nothing else. Li Tianlan just exchanged a sword move with him and could not judge his strength for the time being. He could only put him behind Jiang Shangyu. Face. Li Tianlan himself. Wang Xingshao, Li Kuangtu, Lin Yuxian, Jiang Shangyu, and Lin Shi. In Li Tianlan's eyes, this was the combat capability that could truly be said to be at the peak level in the dark world. After Lin Shi, the rest who could be named basically belonged to the second tier of the dark world. Among the second tier experts, Wang Xiaoyao was undoubtedly the strongest. This deeply hidden expert at the peak of the invincible realm still had a lot of room for improvement. With Wang Xiaoyao as the leader, Moraid, the commander of the Knights Templars, Flaming Fire, Full Moon Song, Gu Xingyun, Situzanyue, Saint, and Dijiang were all experts at this level. The gap from the invincible realm to the peak of the invincible realm seemed very big, but if one thought about it carefully, in fact, the gap at the peak level was not small at all. Wang Xingshao is different from Jiang Shangyu. Xianyuan Wushang said with a grim expression. They are all enemies. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes lazily as if he was about to fall asleep. He said that he was an enemy, but in fact, there was no hostility at all. Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly, not knowing what to say. From Li Tianlan's point of view, they were indeed all enemies. But the concept of enemies was completely different. Wang Xingxiao would not be a match for Li Tianlan. At this stage, the gap between them might be infinitely close, but when Qin Weibai woke up, the gap between the two would be completely widened. Only Jiang Shanyu could really threaten Li Tianlan's life. There was no rule in the chaotic state. If there was an extreme case, Jiang Shanyu's strength could grow to the point that no one could contend with in an instant. Taking a step back, even if the human Emperor Palace had conflicts with the space-time corridor, they were all human clan. In the face of major issues, some grievances were just trifles that could be controlled. Only the Dark Shadow and Order were their eternal enemies. Xianyuan Wushang thought for a while and shook his head. It's true that they are all enemies, but the Wang family of Beihai is not in a good situation at present. Wang Xingxiao challenged you to show his strength and tell the dark world that the Wang family of Beihai has regained its footing. But that's all. The final battle in Beihai caused them heavy losses. This is not only a problem of the loss of hard strength and high-end combat capability, but also their biggest dilemma is the uncertainty of people's hearts. For a long time to come, the Wang family of Beihai is very difficult to expand. They have to stabilize the internal situation, restore the confidence of the people of the Wang family of Beihai, and let the 7 sword-holding families regain control of Beihai. They also have to fight with Wang Qinglei and Wang Xiaoyao. Emperor Dong's palace? They have the will but not the power. But Jiang Shangyu is different. At this stage, he and Gu Xingyun are the few people who can check and balance you. I have confirmed that Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun have been in contact recently and disappeared mysteriously a few days ago. I don't know what they are plotting. If they reach an agreement, the 3 of them stand together, plus Kunlun City and the Purgatory of Heaven capital. This is already a very luxurious lineup. Brother, even if you are invincible, what are your chances of winning in the face of the 3 of them? The most important thing is that as soon as this force appears, it will be noticed by the Parliament of Zhongzhou State. How will they react then? Li Tianlan smiled, still in a lazy manner. Xianyuan Wushang said in a low voice, Emperor Dong's palace is developing too fast. Brother, the speed of your rise and progress has made everyone think of the risk of losing control. Even if you have been cleared in the case of Qin Fangqing and Qin Shi, their doubts about you will become clear. The current general trend of Zhongzhou State seems to be the upcoming election. In fact, each group and force has its own thoughts. Beihai wants to stabilize the internal situation, the academics wants to expand, the giant group wants to completely reshuffle, the new group wants to rise, and the prince group wants to protect itself. Among the several groups, in addition to the giant group and the ambiguous north group, whether it is the academics who want to expand, the prince group who want to protect itself, the southeast group who want to stabilize the internal situation, or the special warfare group who want to survive, they all have a premise. That is to do their best to limit the development of you and the new group. When a person or a force is too outstanding and dazzling, this is the inevitable situation. So they will definitely extend an olive branch to Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, and Li Guangtu, and let them check and balance you. Xianyuan Wushang said quickly, Wuqing has gone to Jiang Shangyu, and I personally think that we can't let go of Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu. We might as well take advantage of this time to do something. Li Tianlan yawned and said slowly, I'm so sleepy. Xianyuan Wushang almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He tried to take a deep breath, looked at Li Tianlan, and subconsciously wanted to sigh. But the moment his eyes fell on Li Tianlan, his whole body suddenly froze. Chapter 1160. Li Tianlan didn't react to Xianyuan Wushang's change. He just leaned back in his chair lazily and looked at Qin Weibai and Gu Xianyan, who were helping him choose food in the restaurant. He looked a little confused. But in Xianyuan Wushang's eyes, Li Tianlan's whole body was glowing. Countless rules representing neutrality were circling around him and merging into his body bit by bit. In this state, Li Tianlan was simply a ball of light that couldn't be looked at directly. A large number of neutral rules built one chain after another on his body. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes fell on those chains. The intelligence center, which could normally think and analyze on his behalf, reacted immediately. Special energy detected. Do you want to analyze? Xianyuan Wushang froze on the spot and didn't speak for a long time. He used his authority to create an intelligence center that was equivalent to a second brain and asked slowly, special energy detected. Do you want to analyze? Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and shook his head hard. Analyzing Li Tianlan was something that Xianyuan Wushang had never thought about. The rule chains and bright light surrounding Li Tianlan were always in his sight. But every time he looked directly at Li Tianlan, the intelligence center only gave him one kind of prompt. Special energy detected. Unable to analyze. And, unable to analyze, became, do you want to analyze? What did that mean? Xianyuan Wushang's heart shook. He was Li Tianlan's guide. If something happened to Li Tianlan during his return, no matter what happened, it would be his responsibility. He couldn't escape. He would even become the greatest sinner in the history of the human clan. The intelligence center began to give the third prompt. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and ordered the intelligence center. Analyze target. A large number of rule chains that were completely different from the light and shadow on Li Tianlan flew out of Xianyuan Wushang's body. His authority was in the order camp. The analysis of the order camp was the most detailed analysis under the starry sky. Because absolute order could quantify everything and turn it into the clearest data. Analysis instruction confirmed. Instruction valid. Beginning analysis. Analysis progress 8%. 15%. 30%. 62%. 88%. 99%. The progress bar of the analysis quickly rose and then got stuck at 99%. Is this the practice of the starry sky? The corners of Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched. The target cannot be completely analyzed. The analyzed data will be merged into the database. Beginning data conversion. 1%. 39%. 66%. 99%. 100%. You do not have sufficient authority. You can only perform a rough analysis of the target. Detailed data is incomplete, major missing. Countless numbers appeared in front of Xianyuan Wushang, forming a virtual screen that only he could see. Xianyuan Wushang narrowed his eyes and watched carefully. Target identity, Li Tianlan, male, 23 years old. Evolution destination, Huangxi. Compatibility 99%. The beginning of the ancient human race, the mortal enemy of the world, the Forbidden Emperor. Status, shallow recovery, initial return. Current progress, 0.003%. HP, extremely low. Real environment, extremely high, combat strength, relatively low. Basic officer level, real environment, peak, weakness, 65252-. Natural enemies, order, shadow. Battle power, 39999 power, 988 agility, 956 stamina, 3523 mind, 999 intelligence, 757 blessed by truth. Exclusive, super reality aura. Peak neutral halo. Critical hit rate, 100% speed, 757 critical hit damage, 100% special features, mad attack, attack speed increased by 500%. Not awake. Special features, death battle, attack power increased, critical hit damage increased, speed increased, all-round improvement, all special effects plus 300%. Not awake. Special features, thunderstrike, critical hit damage increased by 1500%. Not awake. Special features, solo, damage to group targets increased by 1500%. Not awake. Special features, gale, ignore spatial distance to a certain extent, Movement speed increased by 900%. Not awake. Special features, true strike. Special features, termination. Special features, brutal. Special features, omnipresent. Special features, indestructible. Special features, extreme penetration. Special features, immune to instant death. Special features. Special features, authority, master of human clan's divine weapon, missing, authority, master of human clan's fate, missing, authority, master of human clan's influence, missing, authority, human clan, reality of target's body, 100% target's soul state, severely incomplete. Divine form. Divine form, catastrophe, activated, activation degree 15%, divine form, heaven smiting, shallow initial use, not activated, divine form, 9 deaths, not activated, divine form, divine form. Others. Divine weapon, sky-mending stone, isolated state. The corners of Xianyuan Wushang's mouth kept twitching when he saw the densely packed characteristics. He just glanced at them roughly. There were at least hundreds of characteristics, but what he could see was just the tip of the iceberg. Even if it was just the tip of the iceberg, it was enough to make him a little insane. The first expert in the history of the human clan. Xianyuan Wushang could be said to be the first person to see part of Li Tianlan's data. What was the super reality halo? Xianyuan Wushang had never heard of it. As for the so-called peak neutral halo, his father, the great Emperor Xianyuan, had it, but it was not at the peak at all. It was super medium halo. Neutral halo. The halos of human emperor and god of war were probably at this level. As for those exposed characteristics, Xianyuan Wushang estimated that even if all the characteristics of his father, god of war, and human emperor were added together, they might not be as many as Li Tianlan's characteristics. The number of divine forms was completely unknown. All kinds of authorities were missing. In this state, Li Tianlan was indeed in an extremely bad state, but his potential was completely endless. Xianyuan Wushang looked at it carefully and finally saw the last column. State of divine weapon, isolated. Xianyuan Wushang's face changed dramatically. He suddenly stood up with a livid face. What's wrong? Li Tianlan asked faintly. Xianyuan Wushang's face was uncertain, and he was a little frightened. How could Wuqing be isolated? How could it be possible? Big brother, Xianyuan Wushang gritted his teeth and was just about to speak. An incomparably brilliant light suddenly appeared in the restaurant. Xianyuan Wushang looked up in astonishment. There were colorful colors everywhere in his sight. The gorgeous colors covered the restaurant. And the source was the sky outside the window of the hotel. At the end of the world far away, the colorful light was like a rainbow bridge between heaven and earth, spreading directly from the end of the world to Li Tianlan. Wisps of light kept pouring into Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan's laziness gradually disappeared. Xianyuan Wushang felt a sharp and piercingly cold aura that he was very familiar with. Li Tianlan sat up straight and narrowed his eyes. Countless colors flashed in his eyes. The atmosphere in the whole restaurant was solemn. At this moment, he finally felt Wuqing's aura again. Li Tianlan slowly knocked on the table and took a deep look at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang was dumbfounded, and his eyes were confused. I'll go there. Li Tianlan stood up and said calmly. Covered with brilliant light, he walked straight to the edge of the window. The window shattered without a sound. Li Tianlan stepped on the rainbow bridge that ran through the whole world. It was a huge rainbow that spread from Nanyuan province of Zhongzhou state to Yuzhou. It was the brightest rainbow since the founding of the country. Li Tianlan stood firm on the rainbow bridge. The rainbow that ran through most of Zhongzhou state suddenly burst into light. The real distance was modified in an instant. Far became close. Near became far. Li Tianlan took a step forward. The huge rainbow kept shrinking and finally disappeared. The next second, Li Tianlan saw an incomparably dark and twisted forest. Wu Qing's aura seemed to be far away, but it also seemed to be close at hand. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment, and finally, the corners of his mouth rose and he sneered. Ha! Chapter 1161. The golden light and the darkness were constantly entangled in the gloomy domain. The battle, which lasted less than 3 minutes from beginning to end, was over. Or it was a stalemate. Jiang Shangyu, surrounded by golden light and dark shadows, lowered his head and silently turned the pages of the book. The light and shadow whistled and rose around him, and the pages turned faster and faster. Wu Qing had completely calmed down. All the light on his body had completely dissipated. At this time, he was sitting quietly on the ground, silently fighting against the chains of order entangled on his body. He maintained the form of order and returned to the most essential state. Wu Qing turned into a stone. His figure was motionless in the dark domain. His figure, completely exposed in front of Jiang Shangyu, looked like a monkey. A stone monkey. Jiang Shangyu frowned slightly. The pages of the list of deification were turned like the wind. Black blood kept flowing out of his fingertips, adding line after line of handwriting on the ancient golden pages. Wu Qing just looked at him silently. He returned to the state of the sky-mending stone and froze in place. His hairy face was expressionless, but there was a touch of sarcasm in his eyes before they froze. I'm the one who thought too simply. Jiang Shangyu flipped through the book in his hand and said in a flat voice. As the most core divine artifact in the Order camp, the importance of the list of deification was self-evident. But to be fair, the power of this book was actually not outstanding. Many so-called divine artifacts that were not the core could cause more destruction than the list of deification. But the core function of the list of deification was almost irreplaceable. In a sense, it was also unique. The list of deification could have a direct impact on the peak combat power of each camp. Just this point alone was enough to make everyone tremble in fear. This also represented the peak of its level. Under the starry sky, the peak was God. The list of deification could be conferred as a god, which was a huge boost, but also a huge limitation. This was something built by the bottom rules of the world. To some extent, every time it was conferred, it could be said to be an increase in combat power. Accepting this kind of conferment was equivalent to accepting a certain order that needed to be protected by the conferment. Jiang Shangyu used his own chaotic rules to distort the positive effect of the conferment of the list of deification and further increased his negative effect. In the shortest time, he limited Wu Qing's combat capability, and then almost destroyed all his energy. But the divine seal decree here was only a projection. Even if Jiang Shangyu was in his heyday, he could not distort the order on the real list of deification. He could distort the projection and suppress Ruthless, but he could not turn Ruthless into a shadow creature in a short time. Wu Qing became a heaven-mending stone. What was the heaven-mending stone? The number 1 divine weapon of the neutral faction. Jiang Shangyu naturally had such an impression in his mind. But what exactly was the heaven-mending stone? There were very few creatures that could answer this question. Right now, the heaven-mending stone was right next to him. It was clearly visible, but the state it was displaying was as if it didn't exist at all. There were no molecules or atomic particles. Naturally, there was no possibility of contamination or transformation. Jiang Shangyu searched his chaotic memory, trying to know how he had polluted the core of King Wei. But after thinking for a long time, he had no clue. Thus, the battle came to a complete stalemate. He could not do anything to Wu Qing for a while, and Wu Qing naturally could not do anything to him. Jiang Shangyu was still turning the page. The surging golden light suddenly sped up. A grain of golden sand drifted out from the page. Jiang Shangyu froze and subconsciously looked at Wu Qing. Wu Qing's body was still frozen, but Jiang Shangyu felt that the sarcasm in the corner of his eyes seemed to be a little stronger. Another grain of golden sand drifted out from the page. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack appeared on the page. The cracks began to expand, densely packed, and in the blink of an eye, they spread to the golden book. The countless titles left by the black blood on the page were being erased one by one. The consciousness of the list of deification clearly felt that it was being used as a projection, and it was instinctively destroying everything across an endless distance. The sequence chain on Wu Qing's body began to decrease. Jiang Shangyu looked at the pair of sarcastic eyes in front of him and suddenly laughed. What's the use? Although I can't use the list of deification now, your energy is less than 1/10 of it. How much combat power do you have now? The peak of the thunder-shocking realm? The invincible realm? The strongest is only at the peak of the invincible realm. Do you think you are my opponent? Wu Qing was motionless. But the stone-like skin on his body began to gradually recover, and the frozen eyes began to change from sarcasm to fierceness again. Before your energy recovers, I will make you a shadow creature. You, Buzz. Before Jiang Shangyu could finish his words, there was a sudden scream in the world in the domain. A sharp buzz. Wu Qing, who obviously hadn't gotten rid of the shackles of order, suddenly stood up. The collapsing order directly left countless scars on his body. But Wu Qing, who was impatient and furious, had already taken out the rod and smashed it directly at Jiang Shangyu's head. There were many shadows of the rod. There were illusory shadows of the rod everywhere in the domain. They seemed light, but in fact, every blow was as powerful as a thunderbolt. The rod vibrated wildly in Wu Qing's hand. In less than a second, no one knew how many times Wu Qing had attacked with his last energy. Jiang Shangyu's body was completely broken in the violent attack. The black mist diffused without any pattern. A black rain fell in the recondensed domain. The rain fell unscrupulously, falling on the ground. The originally verdant grass began to spread crazily. Thorns grew out of the grass and leaves turned into giant trees, and the giant trees turned into jungles. Everything was growing irregularly. More black raindrops poured down. One by one, Jiang Shangyu walked out of the twisted jungle that was formed again. Attack! All the Jiang Shangyu rushed forward at the same time, desperately rushing to Wu Qing. There were tens of thousands of them. Looking from above, it looked like groups of locusts were madly attacking Wu Qing's body. Wu Qing carried the iron rod on his shoulder, and pulled a few short golden hairs from his furry face with an expressionless face. The short hairs floated slightly in his hand. Wu Qing blew gently. Countless microorganisms began to gather in his hands. Then, they jumped down from his palms and rapidly grew in size. At the same time, they also turned into heartless who were wielding clubs. Countless Wu Qing and countless Jiang Shanyu charged at each other at the same time. In the twisted jungle, there were entangled black shadow creatures and golden monkeys everywhere. The one-on-one killing seemed to become a real war in an instant. The golden light in Wu Qing's eyes shone. More and more monkeys appeared around him, all of which looked exactly like him. In this state, he could not distinguish Jiang Shangyu. And Jiang Shangyu could not distinguish his real body either. Before the real bodies of the two sides met, both of them could be said to be absolutely safe. And this was the situation that Wu Qing wanted. Chapter 1162. Dead silence, cold, and weird. A large piece of dark space was constantly fluctuating in front of him. The space was constantly twisting, changing its shape. It changed shape, turned into a fortress, turned into a sky full of artillery fire, turned into a city, and finally turned into ruins. There was no sound, and there was an indescribable silence between heaven and earth. Colorful rays of light flickered in and out of the darkness. The darkness was torn apart for a moment. As soon as the soaring sword energy rushed out, a thicker darkness completely sealed the space again. The colorful light disappeared and was replaced by golden light. The golden light and the darkness merged together, looking gorgeous and evil. The whole space seemed to have become an extremely gorgeous and grand curtain. Li Kuangta stared at the constantly fluctuating dark space and had been silent for a long time. With his vision, he could naturally see what this space meant. It was an unbelievably sturdy domain. It was extremely resilient and ever-changing, but it was unbreakable. In today's dark world, Jiang Shangyu could be said to be the first person in the domain. Li Kuangtu also recognized this very much. He combined a bunch of messy unique skills in the domain into a unique skill that belonged to him and surpassed the power of the peak of the invincible realm. Li Kuangtu believed that even if he was in Jiang Shangyu's domain, he would suffer a loss if he was not careful. But even so, for Li Kuangtu, who had studied swordsmanship all his life, Jiang Shangyu's domain was very strong, but it was not really unbreakable. If he went all out, he had at least 60% confidence to kill Jiang Shangyu at the cost of serious injury. Li Kuangtu had always thought so. But this impression was completely broken in this domain today. No one could see what was happening in the domain. A large piece of light was constantly shining, as if a domain of heaven and earth had formed a city, enveloped the village, and isolated everyone. It seemed to have become a battlefield for Jiang Shangyu alone. Li Tianlan? Li Kuangtu suddenly asked. Maybe. Gu Xingyan glanced at Li Kuangtu's body intentionally or unintentionally, as if he was looking for his weakness, with an undisguised malice. He just accepted the rules of the shadow, but he could not be regarded as a complete shadow creature. But under the influence of Jiang Shangyu's domain, he also had the capital to get rid of the real environment. This was the base that Jiang Shangyu had carefully cultivated for many years. His fighting strength could reach its peak here, and Gu Xingyan's fighting strength could also reach its strongest state. Therefore, at this moment, although Gu Xingyan's realm was still at the peak of the invincible realm, the strength he exerted in the base was almost the same as Li Kuangtu's. Most importantly, Li Kuangtu was injured. In such a situation, Gu Xingyan had even begun to fantasize about the possibility of killing Li Kuangtu more than once. Li Kuangtu seemed to sense something. He frowned and looked back at Gu Xingyan. Gu Xingyan still looked at him maliciously and did not give in at all. If you want to fight, you can try. Li Kuangtu said plainly, otherwise, you'd better put away your face. You look like a wild dog that doesn't know how to restrain its emotions. It's very disgusting. Don't challenge my patience. If you keep looking at me like that, I'll dig your dog eyes out. Are you sure? Gu Xingyan grinned. Xing! The sound of countless swords being unsheathed rang out from within the village. Li Kuangtu's eyes suddenly condensed, and his aura soared. The violent sword energy between heaven and earth appeared out of thin air. A void but absolutely dazzling sharpness directly gathered in front of Li Kuangtu. Gu Xingyan smiled strangely. He said something that he had never said to Li Kuangtu in his life. More than 20 years ago, he didn't even dare to have a similar idea. Even if he succeeded in overthrowing Li Kuangtu, overthrowing the Li family, and becoming the god of war of Zhongzhou state, he didn't have a similar idea. However, in this base that was filled with the radiation of the shadow rule, he naturally said something that even he would have thought to be extremely arrogant before. Do you want to die? In the extremely quiet village, the doors of every household and every villager in the streets and alleys opened at the same time. Li Kuangtu's eyes suddenly condensed. Gu Xingyan's provocation almost hit his face. For Li Kuangtu, who had been looking down on Gu Xingyan, this was the most unbearable thing. The endless sharpness shone more brightly. Li Kuangtu's aura soared to his current strongest state in an instant. Facing a formidable enemy? The enemy was unknown? The outcome was unpredictable? This was never Li Kuangtu's test. It was something to worry about. He, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyan were just partners, not subordinates of anyone. Since Gu Xingyan didn't care about the so-called overall situation, why should he care? I always feel that there are some problems with our cooperation. Jiang Shangyu can occupy 30% of the Special Warfare Agency of Zhongzhou State, and I occupy 40%. As for you, a traitor, why do you want 30%? Not all of the Special Warfare Agency of Zhongzhou State belongs to me, and I always need some other voices. I think we should give some space to other groups. And this space will come from you. What do you think? Gu Xingyan laughed and said, I'll give you 10%, no more. Li Kuangtu took a deep breath and didn't speak. There was no need to speak. Without any hesitation, he directly raised his palm. Boom! Thousands of sword energy flew straight down like a wild stream. The violent sword energy rushed directly to Gu Xingyun without any reservation. The dark light in front of Gu Xingyun shone, and a domain was formed in an instant. Countless sword energy hit the domain in front of Gu Xingyun. Li Kuangtu's eyes flashed, and he strode forward. He raised his hands at the same time. His 10 fingers moved slightly, and the residual shadows flickered. The sword energy between heaven and earth changed completely. The ninth sky was endless. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 different kinds of sword energy flew in an instant. Li Kuangtu suddenly pointed forward. Different sword energy and different sword intents gathered into a dazzling flowing light at the same time. Crack! The sword light pierced into Gu Xingyun's domain. At the same time. Outside the village. Outside Jiang Shangyu's domain. At the edge of the twisted forest, Li Tianlan, with a cold face, pressed his palm directly on a thick and twisted tree. There was a sudden roar. Countless rays of light emerged directly from Li Tianlan's hands. The sword light was unscrupulous, sweeping through heaven and earth and spreading wildly in all directions. Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun's expressions changed dramatically almost at the same time. The sword energy and sword intents around them turned almost at the same time, and countless forces began to spread to the periphery of the base. Farther away, with Li Tianlan as the center, the fierce sword light shattered everything. It seemed that in just a moment, the extremely bright light had completely illuminated the darkness. Chapter 1163. It was mighty and the world was turned upside down. There was no word that could accurately describe the destructive power of this moment. At the edge of the twisted forest, the light on Li Tianlan's body had completely disappeared. Pieces of transparent space waves flew unscrupulously in all directions with him as the center. Messy, violent, ostentatious, and fierce. Li Kuangtu's sword light, Gu Xingyun's domain, ruthless energy, and even the rules executed by Jiang Shangyu were all gathering toward him uncontrollably. The powerful force destroyed everything in the twisted forest at an incredible speed. This was a power that could penetrate heaven and earth and crush everything. The space kept twisting, turning into ripples, becoming faster and faster, turning into a raging tide, and finally completely turning into a tsunami between heaven and earth. Boom! Heaven and earth shook together. The twisted forest trembled clearly, and the tsunami-like space ripples swept in all directions. A large number of giant black trees began to disappear at the same time, turning into black powder all over the sky, and then turning into nothingness in an instant. There was nothing in front of Li Tianlan, no obstacles. He looked at everything around him casually. Everything he could see and couldn't see, in all directions, everything around him, all turned into nothingness and emptiness in his sword energy. The piercingly cold killing intent continued to surge, reaching the peak in a flash, and then completely crossing the peak without any pause. It was easy, without any obstacles. In the domain that initially got rid of the real environment, Jiang Shangyu would become stronger, and so would Li Tianlan. In a stronger state, Li Tianlan's mind became clearer. He hated everything here instinctively. He couldn't tell why, but the first time he saw the twisted forest, all he could think of was destruction. His instinct drove him to do his best to destroy everything. Dense space ripples continued to spread. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows, and his voice ran through the whole twisted forest in an instant. The sword energy here is enhanced. His mind suddenly focused, and the power inside and outside his body was completely boiling. His blood was flowing and roaring, and his bones were completely tense. His great willpower was shaking with endless power. At this moment, Li Tianlan's willpower was completely integrated with heaven and earth. The physical rules about power were slightly modified for a moment. Chaotic and mournful cries instantly filled the sky. The space ripples formed by the sword energy whistled and became more and more violent at a rate visible to the naked eye. The space around Li Tianlan had been completely shattered, and the darkness of nothingness seemed to have swallowed him up. The ripples of the sword energy, which were as fast as lightning, emerged around him with a large number of shadows. They tore through the forest, rushed to the sky, and went deep into the ground. One after another, arcs of sword chi covered every inch of space. Dust flew everywhere. In all directions, countless huge black trees were slashed into the air and turned into nothingness. Every single weed on the ground was completely crushed. The sword chi, which had been strengthened by several times, completely lifted up the surface of the ground over 10,000 meters. Smoke and dust covered the entire forest. The sword energy around Li Tianlan had completely formed a torrent visible to the naked eye, rushing forward. The forest disappeared completely in the mighty sword chi. In an extremely distant place, the boundless sword intent encountered a clear and tenacious obstruction. Countless sword chi struck the barrier and slid in another direction. The barrier seemed to be extremely far away, but it also seemed to be only one step away. It was chaotic, vague, and unclear. Li Tianlan's voice echoed in the sky again, like clear thunder, and could be heard between heaven and earth. The domain is forbidden here. The vague domain in his consciousness suddenly stiffened. The space around him seemed to have completely turned into sharp sword energy in an instant. There was no space in the world, only sword intent, sword light, and sword energy. This was the world of swords. The voice echoing between heaven and earth was passionate and wanton, with arrogance and confidence. The swordsmanship is supreme here. Crack, boom. The moment the clear cracking sound rang out, it was followed by an earth-shattering explosion. The surging sword light tore apart the stiff obstruction in an instant. The darkness disappeared, the vagueness disappeared, and the chaos disappeared. In Li Tianlan's sight, a domain that had been solidified to the extreme was completely shattered under the impact of the sword light, bringing up black fog all over the sky. The black fog floated and was completely absorbed by the sword light, turning into power. All the power was consumed crazily. The sword energy was strengthened. The domain was forbidden. The swordsmanship was supreme. This was the swordsmanship law that belonged to Li Tianlan. In the absence of ruthlessness, in this space that was vaguely separated from the real environment, Li Tianlan's combat capability vaguely broke away from some kind of restraint. Combined with the physical rules he had unintentionally analyzed in Yuzhou, he turned the area within a radius of hundreds of meters into his own battlefield in the blink of an eye. In this battlefield, the law he uttered was the will of heaven and earth. This was the preliminary advanced use of his own power after it was separated from the real environment. To some extent, it was also the preliminary outbreak of compressing his own power and will. 3 laws, 3 outbursts, and Li Tianlan's aura completely fell to the lowest point. Endless exhaustion and trance began to appear, and Li Tianlan's body trembled and shook slightly. But all the weakness only lasted for less than half a second, not even half a second. Bang! A loud heartbeat suddenly rang out. In the right ventricle, the second heart beat violently, and the majestic power with abundant vitality directly filled his whole body. This power was extremely violent. Li Tianlan could even clearly feel that his blood vessels were shaken to crack, and drops of blood seeped out of his skin. But his whole physical strength and spirit returned to the peak state again after this heartbeat. Puff! The battle in the domain, or even the killing of the war, was completely over. The surging and endless sword energy completely tore the domain of darkness in the most violent way. Jiang Shangyu's domain was directly broken into nothingness all over the sky. There was no sign. There was no time to react. Countless Jiang Shangyu were suppressing a large number of ruthlessness and closing in step by step. In the same second, all the Jiang Shangyu were frozen in place. And countless ruthlessness began to disappear. There was silence in the domain. A transparent wave tore open a corner of the domain and rushed in. Then the transparent waves surged wildly, and in an instant, colorful sword light appeared directly. The shadow was disappearing. Reality became the main theme. One by one, Jiang Shangyu suddenly exploded and turned into thick black mist. In the center of the crowd, Jiang Shangyu, who was hidden in a group of doppelgangers, suddenly turned pale. The corner of his mouth moved, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The red blood mixed with wisps of black fell on the ground. The domain was broken inch by inch. More and more sword energy roared inside the domain. Doppelgangers. Weeds, woods, and cities. Wherever the sword light passed, it was invincible and broke everything. Everything in front of the sword light was shattered. Jiang Shangyu covered his heart. His face became a little ferocious, and he stared in the direction outside the domain. He felt the extreme reality. It was the mortal enemy of order and the dark shadow. The real environment completely shattered his domain, and all the rules of the dark shadow in the domain were firmly suppressed. It was already self-evident who the newcomer was. Li Tianlan. An extremely cold voice sounded directly from the domain. Heaven and earth were shattering. The domain was disappearing, the city was collapsing, and the crowd was vanishing. The ruthlessness in the state of order also disappeared. The real environment spread everywhere. The ruthlessness changed from the state of order to the dark and majestic Xinyuan Feng again. The black color of the blood flowing from the corner of Jiang Shangyu's mouth began to disappear, and it became red and mournful. Jiang Shangyu's combat capability, which had initially gotten rid of the real environment, was once again suppressed to a level beyond the peak of the invincible realm. The real environment became an extremely solid pull. The sword Tao law that Li Tianlan temporarily used also began to disappear with the disappearance of the dark shadow and the chaotic rules. The twisted forest was also disappearing. The breeze blew through the jungle. It was earth-shattering, and a mess. Everything had disappeared. Li Tianlan stood in an extremely dense forest. The forest was green and natural. The twisted and dark forest seemed to have never existed at all. Jiang Shangyu stood less than 10 meters away from Li Tianlan. On the opposite side of Jiang Shangyu, the dark Xinyuan Feng floated quietly, exuding sharp sword intent. Less than 50 meters behind Jiang Shangyu was an extremely vague village. Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu were walking out of the somewhat vague village that did not seem to belong to this world with solemn faces. Li Tianlan was expressionless. He stood in the jungle and did not seem to have the aura of a strong man at all. Even in the perception of Jiang Shangyu and the others, Li Tianlan's existence was illusory. He raised his hand slightly. Ruthless turned slightly in the air, made a whistling sound, and fell directly into his hand. The huge black sword edge of Xinyuan Feng instantly stretched and split, turning into an extremely grand but extremely delicate sword formation, surrounding Li Tianlan in the center. One after another, delicate small swords rotated around him, like shining stars. Li Tianlan's aura became more and more illusory. Jiang Shangyu's figure stood up little by little. He raised his hand and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He stared at Li Tianlan but did not speak. Instead, he began to retreat little by little. Li Tianlan just watched quietly and did not make a move. The atmosphere in the forest became extremely strange in an instant. Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun. The three of them stood together, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. At the level of these three people, they could all see Li Tianlan's current state. It was not that Li Tianlan had no aura at all. Instead, his aura had become so strong that it had become one with the real environment of the whole world. It had become so strong that it was difficult to detect. This was Li Tianlan in the current real environment. There was no sword Tao law. There was no ruthless with abundant energy. There was only himself. But even if the divine weapon in his hand had no energy, he was still a real invincible man standing here. Chapter 1164. A breeze blew through the forest. The wind was soft. In the warm and somewhat stuffy primeval forest of Nanyun, the biting cold drew clear ravines on the ground. Crack, a few giant trees nearby toppled over without warning. Before the thick trunks fell to the ground, they had been broken into pieces in the air. The broken tree trunk rolled casually, revealing the densely packed growth rings. More and more trees fell down without a sound. The incisions of each broken tree were extremely smooth, neat and awe-inspiring. The breeze continued to float, with more and more sword energy. The cold sword intent gradually filled every inch of space. As the wind passed, Jiang Shangyu could even clearly feel the sharp edge seemed to be cutting his domain. He stared deeply at Li Tianlan, his eyes flashing, and his face was a little uncertain. His strongest dark domain had been completely shattered by Li Tianlan. After the domain was shattered, although he was not seriously injured, he had temporarily lost his biggest reliance. That was the authority and rules of the Dark Shadow. He was able to suppress Heartless at his peak because this was the base he had been running for many years. It could be said to be one of his most important trump cards. He had spent close to 15 years building up the Shadow Order here bit by bit, forming this base. In this area, his domain would be greatly amplified, and it even vaguely had the feeling of forming a world of its own. The so-called forming a world of its own was to get rid of the real environment and make the most of the unknown chaotic authority. In this state, he could completely suppress everything in the chaos. Now his domain was completely torn by Li Tianlan, and the Dark Shadow Order built inside the base was also severely damaged. His combat capability was again suppressed by the real environment. Facing Li Tianlan in this state, no matter whether he won or lost, this was not the situation Jiang Shangyu wanted to encounter. From the moment he felt ruthless hostility, Jiang Shangyu had a clear plan, so he took out all his trump cards and suppressed Ruthless with the strongest posture. Jiang Shangyu did not care about the consequences at all. As long as he could get Ruthless, he would give up this base. Once Ruthless fell in the dark and became a divine weapon of the Dark Shadow Camp, then with Ruthless in his hand, he could fight against Li Tianlan at any realm under any circumstances. The problem of Heartless not having enough energy was not a problem at all in the chaotic order. He would defeat Emperor Dong's palace head-on with ruthlessness and make Li Tianlan fall completely. He would create his own brand and legend in the real environment and become the first unknown person to touch the truth since ancient times. He could even use Heartless and his own imprint to cast the entire Miracle City into darkness, allowing him to find the greatest secret of the neutral faction, World's End. Jiang Shangyu had high expectations for this. He was certain that the space-time corridor would not be able to determine his condition, and Heartless would not know. As long as he gave it his all, taking down Heartless was only a matter of time. He used the chaotic order to invade the Heartless fate, and together with him, they squandered the Heartless energy. This was the first step. In order to resist the influence of chaos, Heartless could only turn himself into a state of absolute order. In this way, he could break free from the chaotic rules, but he would also be unable to accommodate Huang Shi's half-divine form when he entered the state of absolute order. Without the protection of the half-divine form, there was a possibility that Heartless would be contaminated. Therefore, Jiang Shangyu no longer held back. He simulated the projection of the list of deification, suppressed Wu Qing, and forced him to reveal his nature. In the end, the stalemate of the war would inevitably end with Jiang Shangyu's victory. In fact, at the moment when the domain was broken, Jiang Shangyu had already gained a considerable advantage. In less than 2 hours at most. Or even an hour and a half. The shadow rules in his domain could completely suppress Heartless. As long as he could do this, Jiang Shangyu's plan would be considered a success. He would give up this base, take Heartless away immediately, hide, and contaminate Heartless completely. This process might take a long time, decades, centuries, or even millennia. But a few years was nothing to him. He could use his authority to disrupt the flow of time in his body. His millennia, compared to the time in Miracle City, might only be a few months, or at most a year or two. During this time, Jiang Shangyu in this space-time would replace him to walk outside. Once he had complete control over Heartless, no one would be able to stop his edge. But Li Tianlan came. Jiang Shangyu was not surprised by this. Even if Li Tianlan and Wu Qing were both in a state of recovery, or even a state where they had not truly recovered, but since the beginning of time, the bond between a man and a sword had long been engraved in their bones. He forced out the half-divine form in Wu Qing's body, but he was powerless to stop it. In this way, the only direction the half-divine form could go was Li Tianlan. Once the divine form merged with Li Tianlan, the other party would be able to detect his position in an instant. So Li Tianlan would definitely come. So Jiang Shangyu was ready to give up this base. All of this was within his expectations. But the only thing that Jiang Shangyu did not expect was Li Tianlan's speed. Li Tianlan came too fast. From the moment the divine form left Heartless to Yuzhou, Jiang Shangyu had a clear analysis. Taking into account a series of influences such as the real environment, the shadow order, and the resonance factor between the divine form and the real environment, the precise time for the divine form to leave Heartless and arrive at Yuzhou should be 5 minutes and 12 seconds. Among them, the divine form needed 5 minutes to fly over the twisted forest. In other words, it only took 12 seconds for the divine form to appear in the real environment and merge with Li Tianlan in Yuzhou. And the time when Li Tianlan arrived at the edge of the twisted forest was 5 minutes and 16 seconds after the divine form left Heartless. 4 seconds. Li Tianlan crossed a distance of thousands of miles from Yuzhou to the periphery of the twisted forest on the edge of Nanyun in 1 step. These 4 seconds also included the time when Li Tianlan locked the position of the twisted forest. In other words, the time when Li Tianlan arrived at the twisted forest from Yuzhou was only about 1 to 2 seconds. That was the time when he took a step. Plane? Rocket? Supersonic cruise? With the development of modern science, there was no technology that could make Li Tianlan appear here in such a short time. The only possibility for such a situation to happen was that it was real. Jiang Shangyu subconsciously gritted his teeth. Real. It was something that made the Dark Shadow and Order camps gnash their teeth in hatred. It was also the biggest reliance of the human clan to survive until now. It was also something that the Dark Shadow and Order absolutely could not have under normal circumstances. The figures who could stand at the top of the neutral camp all had their own real brand. To some extent, this could be said to be the biggest secret of the neutral camp. It was said that the Real was related to the end of the world. It was said that the Real was the key to samsara. It was said that the Real was the ultimate goal of the human clan. It was said that there were too many rumors waiting for the two hostile camps to study. The real environment, the real brand, these things had now become Jiang Shangyu's goals, and they were what he desired most. Li Tianlan could cross thousands of miles in the real environment in 1 step, which was essentially equivalent to some kind of space transfer technology. The real brand on his body interacted with the real environment at that moment and merged with each other. At the moment of fusion, the world was real, and Li Tianlan was illusory. The real and illusory merged with each other. Li Tianlan became the real environment. The real environment also became Li Tianlan. So the real environment erased Li Tianlan in Yuzhou, and then Li Tianlan's real body descended in Nanyun in a way similar to projection. It sounded really incredible. Li Tianlan should not have this ability at present. But the half-divine form that originally belonged to him and merged with him at this time definitely had this ability. So the real came. The Order and the Dark Shadow all collapsed. Li Tianlan regained control of Xianyuan Feng and appeared in front of them. As he slowly retreated step by step, Jiang Shangyu completely stood together with Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu. Xianyuan Feng buzzed, and the sword energy was rampant. Jiang Shangyu took a deep look at Li Tianlan. Countless complicated lights flickered in his eyes. In an instant, he disrupted the authority of Order and turned himself into Order. Special energy found. Insufficient authority, unable to analyze. Jiang Shangyu was not surprised. His eyes immediately fell on Xianyuan Feng, which was revolving around Li Tianlan. Special energy found. Do you want to analyze? Analyzing in progress 6%. 19%. 38%. 67%. 89%. 100%. Preliminary analysis completed. Due to insufficient authority, analysis is limited. Do you want to order? Order was the clearest rule, the absolute law, and it was clear at a glance. The light in Jiang Shangyu's eyes flashed slightly. The next moment, countless data were directly imprinted in his pupils. The completion of the analysis is seriously insufficient, and some information cannot be ordered. Part of the target information has been ordered. Jiang Shangyu's eyes gradually became empty, and the focus of his eyes was on the large piece of data that only he could see. Target: Mend Heaven's Stone, Divine Weapon State, Sword Formation Form, Level 4 Sword Formation, 13 floors. Evolution Destination: Mend Heaven's Stone, Incomplete, the Pillar of the Ancient Human Clan, the Cornerstone of the World, the Forbidden Divine Weapon. State: Preliminary Recovery, Official Return. Current progress: 17%. Details: serious memory loss, body incomplete, core separated, energy dried up. Details: serious damage. Vitality suppressed by the real environment. Combat strength suppressed by the real environment. Weakness, energy, body, will. Natural enemy, order. Shadow. Combat power, 35,000. Incomplete state, extremely suppressed by the real environment. Sword form, attack power, 23,000, 35,000. Attack speed, plus 60%. Critical hit rate, plus 100%. Critical hit damage, plus 150%. All attributes, plus 99. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Sword form, attack power, 15,000, 22,000. Attack speed, plus 150%. Critical hit rate, plus 100%. Critical hit damage, plus 90. All attributes, plus 99. Every divine weapon in the sword formation can trigger a characteristic that can be repeated. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Sky halberd form, attack power, 30,000, 50,000. Attack speed, plus 20. Critical hit rate, plus 100%. Critical hit damage, plus 300. Strength, plus 180. Agility, plus 180. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Cloak form, attack power, 10,000, 10,000. Defense power, 50,000, 50,000. Mental defense power, 35,000, 40,000. Shield power, 30,000. Shadow resistance, plus 300%. Order resistance, plus 300%. Neutral resistance, plus 300%. Health power, plus 9. Mental defense power, plus 300%. Immune to true damage. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Neutral form, King Guard strength, 850. Agility, 930. Stamina, 5,000. Spirit, 800. Intelligence, 700. Speed, 999. Critical hit damage. Characteristics. Exclusive, super neutral halo. Advanced order halo. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Overall characteristics: Emperor, attack speed plus 100%, critical hit damage plus 1000%, attack power plus 1000%, ignores all defense, all resistances, and all shields. Requires divine form, catastrophe, unactivated. Unpredictable grace, attack speed plus 3000%, speed plus 3000%, sword aura radiation speed plus 3000%, ignores block, ignores defense. Requires divine form, heaven smiting, unactivated. Twilight of the Gods, damage to any order health increased by 1500%, ignores the target's level, 20% chance of triggering 3 times the damage. Attacks in any environment can replenish energy and increase HP, requires divine form, extinction, unactivated. Dark Saint Spear, damage to any shadow health increased by 100% to 3000%, ignores the target's level, 5% to 50% chance of triggering 3 to 8 times the damage. Attacks in any environment can replenish energy and increase HP, requires divine form, extinction, unactivated. Sunset, passive characteristic. Attacks in any environment cannot be dodged. Heaven Underworld, attacks in any environment can deal true damage to the target. Every 3 true damage will trigger double true damage. Attack speed plus 600%. Endless Sky, ignores spatial isolation. Requires divine form, extinction, unactivated. Shadow Ripper, creates a constant real space, shapes real rules, distorts souls, annihilates souls. Rebirth and resurrection in any sense have no effect. Requires divine form, 9 deaths, unactivated. Authority. Owner of divine weapon, Huang Shi. Compatibility, 100%. Current owner of divine weapon, Li Tianlan. Compatibility, 99%. Suppressed by real environment. Current environment, real environment 100%. Warning, detected that the current environment is real. Divine Stone, incomplete, is absolutely suppressed. Characteristic has not been activated. Basic attributes reduced. Warning, detected that Divine Stone, incomplete, has a very high compatibility with its owner. When fighting in a real environment, there is an extremely low chance of activating the divine form. Warning, detected that Divine Stone, incomplete, has a very high compatibility with its owner. When fighting in a real environment, the basic attributes of Divine Stone, incomplete, will increase. For every 1% reduction in the real environment, the basic attributes of Divine Stone, incomplete, will double. No upper limit. Warning, for every 1% reduction in the real environment, the probability of activating the divine form and characteristic will increase by 0.001%. Jiang Shangyu sucked in a breath of cold air, and his eyes became more and more stern. The data he had barely analyzed was about 1/10 of all the data of Ruthless in the real environment. But even so, it still had a great impact on his heart. Ruthless now had less than 1/10 of his energy, but even if he had no energy at all, he was still the best divine weapon in the world. Especially when he was held in Li Tianlan's hand, the degree of compatibility was almost 100%. This meant that if not only Wu Qing had appeared in his domain, but also Li Tianlan, under the influence of the real environment, his own strength could be infinitely close to the supreme realm, and Wu Qing's basic attributes would multiply without limit. In that case, not to mention the consequences of activating the divine form, even if Li Tianlan was an ordinary person, a casual slash with the Xianyuan blade in his hand would be enough to completely tear his domain apart. Jiang Shangyu's face was a little gloomy. Although his shadow rules had suffered a heavy blow, it was not a setback. Jiang Shangyu originally planned to condense the domain again, so that this space could be separated from the real environment again, so that he and Gu Xingyun could become stronger. But after seeing the analysis of Ruthless, he had completely dispelled this idea. Once again out of the real environment, facing Li Tianlan with Xianyuan blade in his hand, unless he was ruthless enough to destroy Miracle City, he would be courting death. Almost in an instant, Jiang Shangyu determined the policy to treat Li Tianlan in the future. He could only use real combat capability to deal with Li Tianlan in the real environment. This was undoubtedly extremely difficult. But no matter how difficult it was much better than suicide. The wind inside the forest was getting colder and colder. Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Guangtu beside him, and then at Jiang Shangyu beside him. His somewhat gloomy and cold voice suddenly sounded, extremely firm and decisive. "You two, come at me together." Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu's eyes froze at the same time. The sword formation rotated around Li Tianlan. In the center of the sword formation, Li Tianlan, expressionless, took a deep look at Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu met his gaze without dodging. Li Tianlan finally spoke. His voice was ethereal and majestic. Have you really made up your mind? What do you mean? Li Guangtu's eyes flashed. Li Tianlan said lightly, from childhood to adulthood, everything I have borne and carried, in terms of the root cause, is to investigate the truth of your treason, to prove your innocence, to prove the innocence of the Li family, and to let our Li family stand on the peak of the dark world again. Before the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, this was all my responsibility. After the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, I have done what I should do. If you want, I can reverse the verdict of your treason at any time. For more than 20 years, I have not let anyone down in the Li family. Li Tianlan floated in the air and looked down at Li Guangtu. What about you? What did you do? And now, in this case, from what standpoint do you stand on the opposite side of me? Look around you. The enemy who made you bear the infamy of treason and destroyed the whole Li family is beside you. You are actually cooperating with him to deal with the Li family? The Li family is dead. Only the Li family under my control is the real Li family. Our glory doesn't need an outsider like you to restore. I, and my purgatory of heaven capital, can do everything. Li Guangtu suddenly said coldly, everything you have should have belonged to me. You should have thought of this day when you took something you shouldn't have. Li Tianlan took a deep look at Li Guangtu. His voice was a little tired. I can give you one last chance to dissolve the purgatory of heaven capital and stand by my side. Everything that happened today can be regarded as if nothing happened. The conflict between us doesn't have to be a life and death fight. Li Guangtu twitched the corner of his mouth. The smile on the corner of his mouth was getting bigger and bigger. At the same time, his aura was also rising, and he became arrogant and crazy. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. Li Guangtu looked straight at Li Tianlan. He said his answer word by word, there is only one of us. Li Tianlan's calm eyes became cold little by little. The exquisite sword formation that was revolving around him suddenly stopped. Li Tianlan's voice sounded in the forest. My answer to you, boom. The sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly shook. The forest within a radius of hundreds of meters was completely shattered by the infinite sword energy in an instant. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in front of Li Guangtu, and the sword energy soared into the sky. I'm very disappointed. Chapter 1165. The raging sword energy hovered wildly. In an instant, a shining sword edge appeared in front of Li Guangtu. It was not Li Tianlan. It was the sword edge. In everyone's perception, Li Tianlan's body and the sword formation all disappeared. He seemed to have become a magic weapon shining with cold light, appearing in Li Guangtu's chest with extreme indifference and anger. The moment the sword edge pierced Li Guangtu's clothes, his fingers moved slightly and completed the handprint in the shortest time possible. Infinite collection. The dazzling light burst out in an instant. The sword energy entangled with the sword energy and exploded. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows, and the sword formation of the 13 stories tower rotated rapidly. The startling sword enlarged rapidly in his hand and moved straight forward. Large swaths of sword light kept flying around Li Guangtu. The infinite collection, which was supposed to be both offensive and defensive, completely became a defensive unique skill in Li Guangtu's hands. The surging sword energy formed a dense space of sword energy in front of him. A large number of sword energy squeezed together and instantly formed an extremely sharp shield, completely enveloping Li Guangtu inside. The sword edge of the startling sword stopped for a moment at the edge of the shield. The next second, the whole shield suddenly broke, and Li Tianlan took a step closer to Li Guangtu again. The startling sword that was about to pierce Li Guangtu's chest suddenly retracted and became a part of the sword formation again. Li Tianlan took a step forward, and the endless sword energy boiled in front of him. The huge impact directly blew Li Guangtu's figure away. The forest ruins were filled with surging sword lights, whistling fiercely in the direction where Li Kuangtu had flown out. They tore the space and tore the tree trunks. The falling leaves and the constantly flying sword chi danced chaotically and violently at the same time. Li Kuangtu's figure retreated hundreds of meters in the air before he barely stopped. The fierce flying sword energy came to his face like a tide. Li Kuangtu subconsciously crossed his hands in front of him. See seal. The fierce aura rose, and all the matter around Li Kuangtu suddenly rose into the air and gathered wildly in front of him, turning into a vortex. The surging sword chi shot straight through the air, and a large amount of matter was torn apart before it could even get close to Li Kuangtu. For a moment, countless sword lights rushed into the vortex at the same time. Without any delay or stalemate, the vast ocean seal was directly shattered, and the whirlpool that seemed to be able to absorb everything was torn into smoke and dust all over the sky. The torrent of sword chi, which didn't seem to have weakened at all hit Li Kuangtu. Blood splattered everywhere. Strong arms, strong abdomen, face, and legs. Blood splashed all over Li Kuangtu's body, but he still maintained a defensive posture with his hands crossed. He was pushed back another 100 meters by the surging sword chi. This sword is for Grandpa. Li Tianlan's voice was calm and majestic. He stood there quietly, but the invincible aura on his body continued to rise, bringing with it an irresistible force. Do you know your mistake? Li Kuangtu gritted his teeth. The expression in his eyes was extremely complicated. There was a trace of shock, a trace of inexplicable fear, and some indescribable jealousy. The corner of his mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything for a moment. The fight only lasted for a moment. But the strength of Li Tianlan's sword chi was simply incredible. In his perception, the strength of such sword chi had even surpassed that of Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons. He had fought with Wang Tianzong at that time, so he was very sure how strong Li Tianlan's sword chi was now. In front of Li Tianlan's sword chi, all his defenses were as fragile as a piece of thin paper, vulnerable to a single blow and broken at the first touch. In his current state, there was almost no room for resistance under such sword chi. How was this possible? The sword chi rose, and Li Tianlan took another step forward. Whoosh! Within a distance of less than 1 meter in front of him, the calm space suddenly twisted. The twisted space was quickly dyed by a touch of darkness, and in the blink of an eye, it became an extremely distorted domain. The domain began to expand outward. At the moment when the domain was about to explode, Li Tianlan waved his hand. The sword light was endless. In the extremely dazzling light, the domain that had completely exploded was directly suppressed by the sword light. Li Tianlan continued to move forward. The world suddenly became dark. Gu Xingyun's domain was completely suppressed, and Jiang Shangyu's dark domain followed closely and enveloped Li Tianlan. The surrounding forest and the opponents around him all disappeared. The darkness domain continued to gather, turning into weapons after weapons, cannons after cannons. Within the domain, countless attacks took form without any preparation. The 13-story building rotated around Li Tianlan, and the sword chi flowed. The 13-story building suddenly shook. Countless ice blade turrets in the domain were all shattered, and the endless darkness in all directions was completely illuminated by the sword light. The darkness shattered, and the domain that was condensed to the extreme completely exploded. Li Tianlan took the second step. Jiang Shangyu's domain, which was constantly exploding, swept past him with one majestic airflow after another. Li Tianlan's figure passed through the airflow of the explosion, unscathed and as steady as a rock. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, with extremely serious eyes, appeared together beside Li Kuangtu. The three of them stood side by side, as if facing a formidable enemy. How could it be? The corner of Gu Xingyun's mouth moved, and he couldn't help muttering to himself. Li Kuangtu wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. What Gu Xingyun said was exactly what he wanted to say. He could be sure that Li Tianlan's current state was already incredibly strong, even a little stronger than Wang Tianzong in Mormons. What did this mean? In terms of the real realm, Li Tianlan was not even at the peak of the invincible realm. Don't be too nervous. Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled. He is in a special state now, but in fact, he is not as strong as you think. At least he has not broken through to that supreme level. Jiang Shangyu knew better than anyone what the supreme level in the real environment meant. Although the realm of Miracle City was correct to a certain extent, it was far from authoritative in some aspects. Living in the world, the most important indicator to measure combat power was authority, and only authority. Qi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, and thunder shocking. The so-called four realms of martial arts were just substitutions of authority that the founders did not realize, and they only started from the aspect of martial arts. Therefore, in the starry sky, such a realm division was extremely ridiculous, and it was also full of loopholes. Tribulation of Sai City could kill an invincible realm expert in the Qi-controlling realm. Phoenix of the Wang family of Beihai could fight against an invincible realm expert with the strength of the ice-condensing mirror. Fireman of the Li family had also slaughtered a top expert of the half-step invincible realm with the strength of the fire-flaming realm. Azure Dragon Gongsun Qi of Zhongzhou State, known as the first expert under the invincible realm, also seriously injured an invincible realm expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. As for Li Tianlan's brilliant record before entering the invincible realm, there was no need to say more. These were all problems that the concept of the four realms of martial arts could not explain. But the concept of supreme was completely different. Supreme, this was not a realm. But if he had to name this realm, the only name that Jiang Shangyu could think of was Supreme Realm. This was the extreme in the real environment, and it was no longer limited to martial arts. This realm could be touched in all directions. At least now, besides martial arts, Jiang Shangyu knew that there were two people who had reached this realm in other fields. One was the old man in charge of the Holy Land. The other was Qin Weibai. The real Qin Weibai. Both of them had reached the transcendent realm in the spiritual field. In the spiritual field, reaching this step was already supreme. This field was the upper limit of the real environment. In other words, this level was the level where one could really touch the authority directly. There were several real places in the neutral camp, and it was rare for people to reach this level in the real environment. In Jiang Shangyu's memory, every noble and the most powerful force of the neutral camp, the corridor of time and space, had reached this step. It sounded like a lot, but when combined with hundreds of trillions of people and countless races, the number of nobles and nobles, which seemed to be a lot, was actually quite pitiful. And they were not the first people to enter the limit of the real environment in their own time. In this era, the first person to enter this level was undoubtedly Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong, who had reached this level, no matter his age or physical condition, showed that he had insufficient potential. Excluding Wang Tianzong, there was no doubt that Li Tianlan was the most promising one to be the first to enter this level and stand at the peak of this supreme level. If Li Tianlan could really reach this step, he would inadvertently affect the rules of martial arts in the real environment. In this way, it would be relatively easier for others to break through. A considerable part of the nobles and nobles in the corridor of time and space belonged to this situation. They all followed the chosen one of their generation to break through and then grew to this point. Such examples had actually begun to appear now. For example, Qin Weibai's breakthrough in the spiritual field had already, intentionally or unintentionally, driven the current progress of Qin Weibai and Gu Xianyan in the spiritual field. And the first person to break through the shackles and successfully go to the limit of the real environment, whether returnees or newcomers, would be highly valued by the whole camp. Such a person had the real potential to be conferred the title of king and go to the peak of authority. And those who broke through a little later but also entered this level would also be valued. Those who could stand at this level, no matter who did it first, at least showed their great potential. As long as they did not die halfway, they would at least be at the level of Marquis in the end. And the first person to enter this level and go to the peak, if he was lucky enough or had great potential, could break the suppression of the real environment to a certain extent at the peak and put half of his foot out of the real environment. And then from touching authority to controlling authority. Reaching this level in martial arts was what Jiang Shangyu once said and Li Tianlan had just done. That was the limit state of the Chosen One, the law of Sword Tao. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.